After being insulted and kicked out, our hero left, wishing Aries good luck in saving the world. He walked out into the rainy night, wondering if he could manage on his own without his auto support. And thus, the tale of an unknown hero begins. Now, after being expelled the night before from the hero party, the former adventurer Slad Majesty finds himself alone. One of his old friends had insisted he stay and assured him that everything would be fine, as long as he kept his skill a secret. Slad had believed he'd be able to help too, but that wasn't the real problem. The issue was that he didn't have enough money to either return home or survive. All his loot had been taken from him, but he tried to comfort himself with the thought that he had donated it to the hero. He knew things weren't in his favor, so he thought it best to look for a job. He headed to the Adventurers Guild, where everything from herb collecting and gathering materials to guarding caravans and hunting monsters was managed. As he walked, he noticed an old woman drop her shopping bag. He approached her and offered to help. She apologized for being a burden, but just seconds later, she began to feel strange. Her pain eased and her body felt lighter. It was the effect of Slad's auto support, which he had activated to help her. Thanks to the skill, his physical abilities received a temporary boost, compensating for the weak muscles. As the name suggests, he couldn't control the skill at will. It always activated for those who truly needed help. He then found himself lost in thought, wondering if the party was doing okay, but tried to shake those thoughts away. His auto support wasn't that amazing of a skill, he told himself. They'd be fine without him. The old woman continued to look at him curiously as he handed her things back after escorting her to her house. She thanked him for his kindness, and he told her that people should help each other in tough times. Although his skill couldn't be used on himself, he was content that he could use it to help those in need. That alone made him feel a bit better. The old lady wanted to thank him with some fruit soaked in honey. He couldn't refuse, he had a sweet tooth. He ate what she offered and thanked her before heading into the bustling Adventurers Guild. He was greeted by a young woman who asked if this was his first time at the guild. He told her that he used to be an adventurer but had retired, so she understood that this was kind of a return for him. She then asked if he had his adventurer badge. He admitted that he didn't need one, so she decided to check with the main branch and asked him to fill out a form. He asked if the pen would confirm his identity, and she told him that it would, since it used magical ink. He held it fascinated and began writing. At the end of the form, she wrote his name, then asked him to sit down and she'd call him once the verification was complete. As he stood there waiting, a loud voice suddenly shouted behind him, demanding to know what kind of party was going on. There was a loud girl yelling at one of the men. Slad watched the both of them from a distance, trying to get a sense of who they were. The bearded man looked like a seasoned warrior based on his gear, while the elf girl seemed to have just left her homeland, naive about the world around her. The bearded man grew irritated and was about to start a fight, but Slad stopped in and asked both of them to stop. The girl shouted at him, telling him not to interfere. The bearded man stepped in and said she was right. He was just giving her a taste of how the guild initiates new members and that she should accept it gracefully. But the elf girl didn't take his words kindly. She flared up again, wanting to fight him. Slad stopped her, telling her that's exactly what they wanted, provoking her into fighting a superior adventurer. He then turned to the bearded man and told him plainly, "What you did was just harassment." The bearded man went silent.
"What did you just say?"
he asked in a tone and presence that suddenly changed.
"I don't recognize your face,"
he added, before judging by Slad's equipment that he was just a rookie. He then threw a cup of water in Slad's face, grabbed him by the collar, and said the guild should teach backtalkers a lesson, demanding that they settle this outside. Slad wanted to end the matter peacefully, but he couldn't back down, and followed the man's lead. Just then, the elf girl stepped in and stopped Slad. She admitted she was in the wrong and had overreacted, but the bearded man dismissed her, saying it was no longer her business. This was now between him and Slad. Confused, she let go of his hand. The two men stepped outside into the open, surrounded by a large crowd. Slad suggested they settle the matter somewhere secluded, but the bearded man wanted to teach him a lesson in front of everyone, to reveal his pathetic truth. Then he lunged at Slad like a bloodthirsty beast. This man was Gans, the only B-rank adventurer in the entire guild. No one dared to challenge him. Back inside, the receptionist girl returned to ask about Slad. The elf told her that Gons had gotten mad at him and taken him outside. The receptionist was, she was shocked. She asked if the newbie had black hair and wore linen. When she confirmed it was him, her expression turned to panic. She rushed out, yelling that they had to stop him quickly. That Gons was the one in trouble. The elf didn't understand what she meant. Meanwhile, Gons was fighting, launching aggressive attacks at Slad, who calmly dodged and analyzed the speed of each strike. To Slad, it felt all too easy and fluid. Gons grew angrier, making his attacks faster and more violent.
Are you really a newbie?
He demanded. That's not right, Slad replied. You're just getting slower. He then grabbed both of Gons' arms and shoved him away, knocking him off balance and onto his knees. Gons stared in disbelief.
I'm not that weak,
he muttered. The onlookers started whispering among themselves, wondering what had happened to Gons, how such dull-looking moves had brought him down. Slad, looking at him with a bored expression, then asked him to stop because he didn't want to see an adventurer like him to go to waste. He then glanced at Gons' armor and asked, Isn't that armor a bit heavy? Gons couldn't hold back. He threw a punch to shut him up, but his fist hit the ground instead. He was sitting there, stunned. He couldn't move. He asked Slad if he had used magic. Slad replied that he's just weak, and because he sees him as an enemy, that weakens him automatically. It was the first time Gons had ever heard of such a skill. Slad explained. It's a unique skill, not a random ability. Only one exists in the world. Those who've had it before all left their names in history as heroes. Gons was amazed, but also flabbergasted that he would just plainly tell him his abilities. There are organizations and guilds out there that hunt for such powers. A unique skill should be kept a tightly guarded secret. But Slad leaned down and explained that he told him because he wanted him to live. He ordered him to surrender. Gons was emotional and shouted in frustration. But Slad warned him that if he didn't surrender, his power would drain, his bones would shatter, his body would collapse, and he would die. Yet Gons was determined. He yelled that he didn't have any rare skills, and that he climbed the ranks on his own. He wasn't going to give up so easily. Then, suddenly, he felt something inside of him crash down like a bolt of lightning, breaking him apart and bringing him to the edge of defeat. Both Dishia, the saint of the hero party, and Remeli, the mage on the same team, were shocked when they found out that Slad had left the hero party without telling them. Dishia was furious and swore she'd punch him if she saw him, but Remeli told her that Slad would never do something like that. Remeli felt genuinely sad. Slad was the one who taught her how to speak the common tongue from scratch, despite her being a half-elf. She knew him well and was certain he wouldn't just disappear like that. Dishia clenched her fists, angry at him for making Remeli feel this way. She had a strong urge to hit him. From the window above, Aries, the hero of the hero party, was watching them silently. Elsewhere, Slad was immersed in an antique shop in the city, discovering a book of epic tales. He was fascinated by the various traits of the races, from the stubborn and skilled dwarves to the elves who tended to hide their emotions. Suddenly, Etekica leapt from a distance and knocked Slad to the ground. She quickly apologized. Slad, however, found her completely different from the graceful elven statue he knew her to be. An hour later, Slad was at the guild reception, telling them about the great ice slime in the ancient ice caverns of Karna. He admitted that he couldn't resist the reward of ice slime candy, but the man told him he could buy it any time if he had money. Then, he offered him something more exciting, like slaying the Elzard dragon of the western lands. Slad declined, so the man suggested they go explore ancient ruins instead. He was so insistent that the friction of him sliding the paper across could have started the desk on fire. Etekica interrupted their conversation, holding a paper and asking Slad to join her on a mission. When he read the mission type, he got excited. It was just the kind of hidden adventure he was looking for. The guildmaster stood up, pleased by the new adventurers bringing life to the guild and prosperity to the city. He started imagining how this could boost the economy. Slad began preparing for the adventure, gathering the essentials. Given his limited budget, he decided to buy used equipment. Etekica helped him search and found a dagger that seemed useful, though she didn't understand what he'd use it for. He didn't exactly strike her as a rogue. Slad was thrilled with the dagger. Just then, the guildmaster walked in, stunned by the mess they had made, and shouted at them to clean it up immediately. Later, the guildmaster sat with the receptionist, sipping coffee and talking about Slad's mission, to hunt a goblin. The receptionist couldn't believe that such a stubborn man could back down quietly. It didn't fit his personality at all. The guildmaster said her description was a bit rude, and that it was just a regular goblin extermination. But he mentioned that 2 seasoned parties had taken on the mission just yesterday and didn't return. Even if it sounded like a common story, things could always take a dark turn. He thought it might be time for Slad to be given an official rank. Meanwhile, Slad and Etekica had set off. Slad asked her about goblins to learn more. Etekica had seen them several times in the Elven forest. Slad explained that goblins aren't strong individually, and they tend to lower their guard easily. But that changes when they attack in groups. He also mentioned their crimes, like kidnapping women. He added that hobgoblins are a mutated strain. Just a single generational male goblin, but they could reproduce with the kidnapped women. Their notable traits were that they were stronger and smarter than common goblins, with some even exceeding 10 meters in height. Slad continued talking nonstop, explaining that there were also goblin shamans who could use magic. He then realized he'd been talking way too much out of excitement, sharing old stories from his adventuring days, and it wasn't exactly the kind of thing to brag about in front of a girl. But Etekica was happy to see his enthusiasm. She had initially been worried she might have forced the party on him. She was thinking that if she ever formed a party, it would just be her and Slad. He also noticed how rare it was for elves to lower their guard, but even so, there was a certain code of ethics. While walking, they spotted goblin footprints, and soon, a goblin nest appeared before them. Slad asked Etekica how she planned to launch their attack. That's when Etekica revealed her skill. She began a summoning ritual. Suddenly, the spirit of wind, Sylph, appeared. Slad immediately realized Etekica was a spirit user, and he asked if she was also a spirit priestess. He figured it out from her clothing, which hinted at her role. Etekica brashly accused him of his assumptions, but he told her to keep quiet so the goblins wouldn't notice them. Etekica's plan was to use Sylph's power to shoot a goblin from afar with an arrow. Slad commented that Sylph was much larger than his usual companions, and gave her an alternate plan. The 3 of them would attack together. Etekica had never done anything like this before, but Slad reassured her they could do it, because he believed in his friends. They got into position, each holding an arrow. At the signal, they released all of them at once. 3 arrows piercing through the goblins' bodies like lightning. Etekica was stunned by their combined power, how they managed to take down 3 targets in one go. Slad praised Sylph for lending her strength, and Etekica giggled, saying she'd be even happier if he praised her too. But at that moment, a goblin appeared behind them, aiming straight at them from a distance. After completing his coming-of-age ceremony, and having his abilities reevaluated amidst the cheers of the crowd, Aries was finally declared at just 15 years old the only savior of the world capable of defeating evil. Yet, Aries was never concerned with saving the world. What he truly desired was power and control. He wanted the supporting characters around him to obey his every command. His greatest wish was to gain respect from everyone, and he even laid down conditions for the king in case he was asked to eliminate the great evil. He was pleased that some of his desires were beginning to come true, but then the king assigned him a baggage carrier to assist him, a boy named Slad. Aries, however, saw Slad as nothing more than a useless burden standing in his way. To him, everyone who followed him merely carried his superior genes and existed to serve him without question. But when Aries began to notice that Slad was drawing attention, especially from the girls who seemed more interested in him, jealousy took over. He decided to expel Slad from the group, thinking that losing a mere luggage boy wouldn't matter. His position blinded him to the truth, and he started threatening anyone who tried to leave his side. Meanwhile, Slad and Etekica continued their journey together, determined to reach their goal. Etekica began to grow tired of the endless rocks and sand. Slad asked her if he could extinguish the torch to avoid being discovered by goblins, but Etekica hesitated, saying it would be too dark to see. Slad replied that his eyes would eventually adapt to the darkness, trying to imitate the stealthy techniques of his old thief companions. He asked Etekica to watch him carefully using her night vision. Trusting her decisions, she asked why they were being so cautious after already defeating the hobgoblin leader. Slad explained that it was rare to see such a large hobgoblin, and that he doubted that this was the real boss. What truly unsettled him was how unaware the creature had been of their presence. He began to suspect that the hobgoblin had been running away from something. Just then, Etekica noticed an alarm bell ahead of them, along with an obviously placed trap. She laughed, saying no one would fall for such an obvious trick, but suddenly, Slad shouted and grabbed her just in time before she fell into a deep pit. Slad realized that the trap was actually brilliant. Avoiding the bell meant falling into the hole. And from such a clever design, he concluded that the goblin shaman was likely nearby. Etekica asked if shamans are strong, and Slad explained that they use black magic and curses fueled by hatred. He sat down, thinking of a way to move forward safely without putting Etekica at risk. As he looked at her, an idea came to him. He asked if she could summon the smallest possible earth spirit. Etekica was confused, but agreed, warning him that such a spirit would only be able to cast weak spells. She began the summoning ritual, and eventually, a tiny earth spirit appeared. Although unsure of the plan's success, Etekica placed her trust in Slad. He told her that with her and the gnome together, they could pull this off. As they worked, goblin voices grew louder, just as Slad had predicted. They triggered the trap and fell into it. Etekica emerged with her spears and quickly took them down. The plan worked perfectly. Slad knew that if one clever goblin had discovered the trap, others might follow soon. He instructed the gnome to expand the pit beneath the alarm, ensuring that any goblins thinking they found a safe route would fall straight in. The plan was simple, but nobody would suspect a trap placed along the path they chose themselves. Slad admitted that this was kind of strategic thinking, something he learned from an old friend. Etekica gently patted the gnome and asked it to cover the hole again so they could continue. Encouraged by her praise, the gnome cheerfully complied. They finally reached their destination, but there was no treasure. Instead, they found 4 passageways ahead, all filled with footprints. They realized the room might be a crossroads used frequently by goblins. Etekica suggested leaving the gnome behind to guard the area, saying other spirits would surely care for him. But Slad explained she could only summon one spirit at a time, and it couldn't wander far from her. He wanted the gnome to join the others at the front lines. Though without listening, Etekica suddenly began to summon again, surprising Slad. He asked her to wait, but it was too late. To their shock, she had summoned a massive earth spirit. Etekica panicked and apologized, saying she didn't mean for it to be so large. Slad reassured her that it might have been a mistake. He reflected on the flaws of passive support magic. Giving immense power doesn't always guarantee better results. That's why he asked her to keep the summons small. Suddenly, more goblins appeared, but they ran in fear upon seeing the enormous spirit. Slad then said that if this was the goblin boss's chamber, they should prepare a trap. He asked Etekica to block all paths except the one they'd use. Etekica suggested that if they ever needed to retreat from stronger enemies, they should set a trap at the exit using the leftover soil. They both signaled the start of the operation and worked together, full of enthusiasm. Slad paused to reflect. When had he stopped enjoying adventuring? He remembered how Aries used to treat him, shouting at him and only calling him when someone needed a skill. Etekica noticed something was bothering him and asked if he was okay. She admitted she was still a little stunned by everything that had happened. Slad smiled, realizing that this thrill, danger, and teamwork was what a real adventure should be. They continued down a dark and frightening path. Slad was convinced a shaman was ahead, as that kind of person always appeared in these places. As they walked, Etekica spotted a skeleton and wondered if it belonged to a human. Suddenly, a massive explosion shook the ground, and a towering hobgoblin appeared before them. Confused and caught off guard, they tried to understand what had just happened. Slad was stunned by the creature's aerial force, and from that alone, he could tell They were getting closer to the boss. They rushed forward, only to realize the horrifying truth. This wasn't a shaman at all. It was a rare and monstrous beast. The small monsters form the goblin hordes, and the higher types of goblins are usually divided into two categories. The first type is the hobgoblin. The hobgoblin specializes in physical attacks. The second type is the goblin shaman, who draws its magic from resentment. Female goblins, being weaker, are often treated as slaves by the males. However, it's rare for a female to share the same mutation as a shaman. And when that happens, the power dynamics can shift drastically. This is where the rare monster, the goblin hag, appears. Slad realized the resentment of the oppressed females far exceeded that of the shamans. Even the terrified hobgoblin tried to escape her control. So Slad told Etekica they needed to retreat, as that monster was beyond them. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shifted, revealing a group of exhausted adventurers, shackled and captured. Slad noticed that the terrifying path they had seen earlier was actually made of human bones. Etekica guessed that they must have been used in strange rituals. At that moment, Slad understood that this would be unbearable for a beginner like Etekica, especially after discovering the monster's skill. Etekica, on impulse, leapt down from above. Slad shouted after her, but was stopped by memories. Aries' insults and curses, calling him useless. Slad had begun to believe this, that his physical abilities were merely average. He had always given his best by supporting from the rear. But I've always been the weakest and a burden. I was always just standing there. Yet he didn't give up. He made the decision to act, because the only adventurer who could save them now was him. With great determination, he charged forward, knowing he was the only one who could change the situation. He ordered Etekica not to attack the goblin hag, but to focus on taking down the goblins around her. Slad soon found himself surrounded, so he called on the gnome to take over. Etekica, meanwhile, dealt with all the goblins surrounding the embrace. Slad was thrilled by the progress they were making. He then noticed the goblin hag was casting a wide-range spell, likely aimed at Etekica. He grabbed a stone, and using basic skills that anyone could learn, threw it at her from afar, to ensure she redirected the spell towards him. The goblin shaman grew furious. Everything around her started to fly chaotically. From afar, Etekica screamed at Slad to move out of the way. But Slad stood his ground and effortlessly deflected the attack. This left the monster in utter shock, unable to believe her attack was that weak. Slad gathered his confidence and began speaking to the monster, who was already preparing her next attack, poisoned claws. But to Slad, they looked so dull that they nearly made him yawn. He remained still in place as she leapt towards him from above. Their powers clashed in a violent explosion. Slad caught her hand and crushed it with force, then finished her off by severing her arm, sealing her poison claws and rendering her truly powerless. She collapsed to the ground. Etekica came rushing from afar, asking what had happened. Knowing Slad's rank, she figured it wouldn't hurt to explain. He told her about his special skill, auto-weakening, which had left the monster unable to even stand on her own. Etekica was shocked to hear this. Slad reminded her of what happened to Gantz, confirming the power of this ability. He explained that full auto-weakening drastically reduced the target's attack power and accelerates their aging without affecting their appearance. It activates upon touch, and even a gentle grip can make bones crumble. Etekica found the skill terrifying. Slad continued, explaining that if the skill senses the hostility towards him has faded, everything could return to normal. Though, he doubted that would be possible for a goblin hag, who had lived in hatred for so long. He knew forgiveness might not even be a concept for her. Etekica felt pity for her, and begged him to end her misery quickly. But that was the real problem. Goblin hags carry the curse of death, a rare skill that dooms anyone who kills its user. To defeat a hag, one must wait for them to die naturally. That's why Slad was the most suitable for this mission. Etekica began to cry, unable to stop her tears. She hugged her gnome tightly, grieving for the goblin hag who had been consumed by hatred and curses. Sorrow filled Slad's heart, too, as he gazed at the fallen creature, still driven by hatred towards her death. He wished she had a second chance to find happiness. They returned with the rescued captives, who were thrilled to be saved and amazed by Slad's and Etekica's strength. Etekica was quiet the entire way. They reached the exit and finally emerged into the sunlight, safe. Slad placed a hand on Etekica's shoulder and congratulated her for completing her first adventure. Then, he asked about what she said before entering the cave. Her selfish desire to protect her family and loved ones. Meeting those adventurers had been a first for her. People she couldn't ignore, even in a city full of strangers. He suggested they celebrate. After all, they made it. Everyone was cheerful and relieved to return safely. They decided to enjoy a feast as their reward. On the way, Etekica thanked Slad for everything and expressed how happy she was to have shared her first adventurer with him. She realized she would have stumbled without him by her side. She asked to stay in the group, and Slad accepted her request. She started jumping with joy. She told him that she had gained confidence in her archery and spirit summoning skills, and she felt ready for greater challenges. Then Slad said something to her, and they headed to a restaurant for a meal. Etekica was angry after hearing that her improvement in archery and spirit summoning was due to Slad's influence. She scolded him for not telling her sooner, but he told her that she seemed so happy that he didn't have the heart to bring it up. Etekica was annoyed, as she thought she had finally been able to help him. Then Slad stood up and, in a serious tone, told her that she had already contributed so much and had matured a lot. He explained that his skill was incomplete without his teammates, and that she had saved him many times. As he spoke, she suddenly interrupted him, and she said that she was headed towards his hotel. Slad didn't expect her to say that. They walked to the hotel, and he opened the door, unable to believe what she said. He wanted to believe she came just to hang out. He opened the window, thinking to himself that although she was still young, elves matured quickly. Etekica approached and asked what he was doing. He was startled to see her standing in front of him without noticing her presence. She told him it was because she ate too much at dinner. She kept admiring his room, saying it matched his rank, then threw herself onto the bed. Seconds later, she was sound asleep. Slad covered her with a blanket, but in a soft voice, she said that this was all fun. He felt the same. It had been a long time since he felt such joy. Since his adventures with his old friends had ended, it had been difficult for him to go on any journey, and his abilities had spread across the entire old continent. But here, in the new continent with Etekica, maybe he could start again as an adventurer. Yet for now, he had something more important to focus on: saving money. Then, suddenly, he looked at Etekica and realized he didn't have a place to sleep. In the Night City, where one could disrupt the entire party. This was how the guild understood the problems adventurers faced. Slad had encountered the system before, but hadn't expected to find it here as well. That's when a young woman approached him. She seemed to enjoy listening to the issues within the party. After all, she greeted him happily, then told him the matter was more serious than he thought. Slad didn't understand what métier meant by that, so she explained that she understood because she was an elf. When an elf refers to a man of another race as family, it's a clear declaration and equivalent to a marriage proposal. Slad was shocked by what he heard. Then métier told him the key point was that she used the word family, and not just friends. Slad replied that he had read in a book that elves refer to acquaintances as family. métier looked at him strangely and told him that for an elven woman to recognize a man as another race of family was a major issue. Then she approached him and said she didn't mind being a second wife. Slad, flustered, gently pushed her away and told her he couldn't take a bride as he didn't have any money. She laughed and said she was just joking. Then she continued, telling him that perhaps she had only had spirits as friends in the forest. She shared her suffering, how people used to ignore her and envy her because she was a spirit user. Slad asked her if she was a spirit user or an adventurer. métier replied with enthusiasm that she had reached S rank at her peak. Slad watched her with a smile. Then she told him that if she pulled on his ear, that would be a sign of consent, and if he responded, It would be seen as accepting marriage. Slad didn't know what to say. Then she told him to treasure Etekica, and warned him that Elven women are extremely emotional, but they never forgive betrayal. Slad felt threatened by her words. Then she remembered the service they provided that allowed him to join and become a member of the party. Slad asked her to stop leading him down a path of evil. After that, he headed to the restaurant where Etekica was sitting, gazing lovingly at the food. Slad entered, and she called to him from her seat. As soon as he sat down, the food had already arrived. Etekica kept looking at him questioningly while he was still visibly nervous. He didn't know what face to show her after Mitier had stirred up the topic of marriage. He tried to convince himself that it was just Mitier overthinking things. He couldn't ask Etekica directly. It would be too awkward if he were wrong. Later, they went on to report that they had defeated the Goblin hag monster. The advisor was shocked, as that monster was capable of wiping out a normal party. She couldn't even comprehend how the two of them survived. Etekica told her that Slad had known the enemy's skills and they survived thanks to that. Slad explained that he had read about it in a book. In the end, the advisor believed them and informed them of Slad's rank. Slad was surprised that she accepted it so easily, and asked if that rank was really impressive. She was taken aback by the question. He told her he had reached that level without even realizing it. She began to explain that to be an adventurer, one needed qualities like combat skill and, above all, competence. Without rare skills, one could only reach A rank at best. More accurately, rank S was created for those with rare abilities, to prevent them from perishing. It was meant for people with unique skills, but not everyone could have it. Only those with great achievements, like saving a country, could earn it. Slad and Etekica listened, stunned by this explanation. Then, calmly, Slad asked about his own rank. She told him simply, he was the man who saved the world. He asked if he was really treated like someone who had saved the world, and she confirmed it. Slad kept thinking to himself how his ability had activated on its own. Then she handed him a document to sign. After reading it, he realized that this must have been a reward receipt, though she denied that and told him that it was a marriage certificate. Then asked him to marry her. Slad was panicking. Both he and Etekica were stunned, frozen in place. He stammered. Wait, did you just say marriage? The girl told him that she was running out of time and that it was just marriage on paper. She told him that he could cheat on her if he wanted. Etekica intervened, but the girl said outsiders couldn't interfere. Etekica shouted in her face and said she was Slad's companion, not an outsider, and asked if she had any prior claim. Etekica declared that the rank was a scam and that it made sense. She told the girl that she didn't care about rank or money, and that if Slad had chosen her himself, it would be different. But she didn't want him to marry someone just for status or wealth. The girl was bothered by her words and stared at her for a moment before sighing. Slad stepped in and apologized. The girl apologized too and said she felt that if she missed this moment, she wouldn't get another chance. Etekica turned around, angry, and told Slad that she'd wait for him at the entrance. She left while Slad wondered if he had upset her. The girl told him it was only natural to feel that way after facing someone important to you. Then she asked what he thought of Etekica. After ending the conversation, Slad quickly headed to the entrance where Etekica was waiting. He thanked her and told her he was truly happy when she said rank didn't matter to her. She replied that she hadn't done anything special. The girl was just being ridiculous. Then she asked if this kind of thing was normal in human cities. He explained that, frankly, it wasn't. She relaxed upon hearing that. But the thought of more people like that girl coming worried her. Then he suddenly asked, Etekica, do you want to marry me? Etekica's cheeks turned red with embarrassment. That's when Slad realized the bombshell he had just dropped. He took it back and asked her to forget what she heard. He told her that ever since yesterday, he'd been hearing about marriage nonstop and apologized. He explained that he had learned that when an elf calls someone the opposite gender family, it means something deep. Etekica covered her face, blushing hard after realizing he knew about that. Then, feeling awkward and shy, she told him she was thankful she called him family. But she didn't think there was any reason for him to marry her. Slad, overwhelmed, asked if it would be okay if he said yes. She refused, and told him he should see her for who she truly is and then decide. He asked her to say it again, but she said it was too early. They had only met yesterday, and a marriage proposal would be too much. She sat on the ground, blushing so much it felt like steam was coming from her. Slad tried to hold back his laughter but couldn't, and burst out laughing. Etekica didn't understand why and asked him. He told her she looked really cute. She got annoyed and asked him to stop. He held her hand and asked her to hurry before the shops closed. He had already exchanged his money. She told him to wait. They weren't done talking. But they headed to the shop, where someone else asked him what he thought of Etekica. Slad had always been looking for someone like her, someone who saw him as family. That's where their adventures began together. Slad headed to the hotel, asking if someone had come for him. He found the receptionist, who asked him about the noble thief. Slad went upstairs and found a girl, asking him if the hotel was nice. He was surprised to see her. Shisha? She greeted him and asked if he could give her more clever responses, like, why was she here? He asked her if she could locate him at a glance. She said she came because she missed him, but Slad wasn't fooled and asked her for a more real reason. She told him she had 3 things to share and decided to start with the most worrying. The hero's party had steadily been being wiped out. This meant the end of the world. Back in the past, where the hero party was fighting with all their might, Dishia stood still after failing to defeat the monster with a single blow. It was harder than usual even for Aries. At that moment, Dishia told him that she'd been extremely scared when that monster attacked her from behind. Aries grew upset and asked if she had meant that they had left her behind, though she clarified that she hadn't said that. That's when Remeli interrupted, saying that if Slad were with them, he would have told them the monster's weakness right away. Their aimless search around the city had led nowhere. They couldn't find Slad anywhere. But Dishia trusted Shisha's ability and believed that she could make up for Slad's absence. She then looked at Aries, criticizing him internally for not putting in enough effort to compensate for Slad's loss. She wanted to understand what he was thinking. Aries was annoyed and asked them to leave. Suddenly, the situation changed when something appeared in front of them. Remeli screamed in fear as a giant wyvern emerged. Meanwhile, Slad was shocked when he heard that the hero party had been annihilated. He couldn't believe it. What? Why? He asked. Shisha told him that it was his fault for leaving them, then mentioned his rank. Slad froze. She asked if he really thought she wouldn't notice. She checked her status every day. Slad hadn't known that. Shisha's role since joining the hero party had been to disable locks and traps, and she'd achieved many victories. That's why she had done her own research. Smiling widely, she told him that if he wanted to stay hidden, he should have at least used an alias. She then moved on to her second report. She had left the hero party. She wanted to apologize to her teammates, but couldn't go through with it. She only bet on certainties, and adventuring was always a matter of life and death. She said that she wasn't responsible. Slad cut her off after realizing he wasn't the reason for the hero party's downfall, but he acknowledged that Shisha's absence had left a huge gap and assumed they'd replace her through the guild before moving to a larger city. But Shisha told him confidently that Aries would only leave the city without replacing her with anyone. With Shisha gone, Aries would be the only frontline fighter. Slad insisted that Aries wouldn't do something so reckless and risk himself like that. Shisha noticed that the people overestimated Aries. She asked Slad if he truly believed that Aries would recruit anyone from the city without a rank, especially men. Slad stared at her, unable to believe what she was saying. To him, Aries was a complete adventurer. Shisha burst out, angry that he trusted people way too much, saying that if Aries ever cried over money, he'd easily dump his debts on someone else. What she said made sense to Slad. He admitted he had covered many people's debts, and that Aries had made himself the guarantor to avoid being tricked. That's when Shisha realized the reason Slad was always broke. Then she told them that she had already won. Aries had left the city the previous night without recruiting anyone. Slad was concerned. He knew they needed at least 2 more frontliners because if the defense line broke, it would disrupt the balance and lead to a worst-case scenario. Total destruction. Slad realized Shisha already knew what would have happened and had tricked him. But she said that even if she hadn't known, she still would have reached the same conclusion. Unlike Slad, who always trusted his teammates carelessly. Slad was speechless. With a slight smile, she told him he couldn't leave her alone and that he hadn't said he would assume anything. Then she offered him a deal. If he listened to her third story, she would let it slide. While they were eating, she told him that from now on, she would join the party with him. When Etekica heard that, she was shocked to find that Slad had been in the hero party. Slad scratched his head and said that he was just a luggage carrier. He added that having Shisha join them as a thief-class expert was like a dream come true. Shisha believed in Slad's skills, and said staying with him benefited her too. That didn't sit well with Etekica. Hero ranks were supposed to be the best of the best, yet Slad looked like a mere drifter. Sensing Etekica's displeasure, Shisha asked her to forgive him. Etekica summoned spirit horses with her skill, and they rode out to save the hero party. Shisha told Slad that he was kind-hearted for going to rescue those who had kicked him out, but she had no choice but to follow his orders since he was the party leader. After hearing this, Etekica understood that the hero had somehow messed things up. Slad told her Aries had a bit of a rebellious streak. Shisha couldn't stand his words and corrected him. Aries wasn't rebellious. He was out of control. Aries could wield the holy sword because he was the chosen, but people said the sword controlled him instead. Mockingly, Shisha added that he couldn't even ride a horse. Slad thought that was harsh, but she wasn't wrong. Then she said he might still be alive, and that she wouldn't be surprised if he had used the other two as bait. Her words were sharp, and Slad wasn't happy about it. But Shisha didn't stop there. She told Etekica that Aries was cruel, arrogant, and dismissive of others, with not a single redeeming quality, and he was still the hero. Etekica was saddened by what she heard, but didn't lose her motivation. She was determined to save the other two. After making their decision, they rode off. Shisha had pretended to surrender back when she was in the hero party to reach the most logical conclusion. She was sure there was a reason behind the sudden reappearance of the hero party's story. Then, Shisha asked Etekica to stop Sylph's wind. Etekica didn't understand why, but Slad guessed that Shisha may have found something. Shisha dismounted and stared at a hat on the ground in disbelief. She told Etekica it was Remeli's witch hat. The one from the hero party. Shisha's eyes widened. Her plan had been thrown off. Etekica kept watching her, trying to understand what she meant by plan. Suddenly, Shisha rushed ahead. Etekica looked at Slad for reassurance. She said Remeli was fine because she wasn't here. But Slad knew how important this hat was to Remeli. If she were really okay, she wouldn't have left behind anything that belonged to her mother. Etekica finally understood. Shisha returned to say that she couldn't find Aries or the others nearby. No monsters, no tracks. That meant they fought far away, and the hat had flown off. Shisha then went to ask Slad to walk back to the main road with her, leaving Etekica behind. Etekica called out, asking why they were so calm, saying that one of their teammates could be dead. Slad replied coldly, saying that if that were the case, he was sorry. Shisha told her that they looked calm because they knew their roles. She explained that if Etekica kept adventuring, she'd come to understand these roles too. Etekica stood frozen in place. Somewhere else, Slad stood feeling helpless, knowing there wasn't much she could do right now. Finding key evidence was Shisha's job as a thief, while he looked for perspective changes. Etekica approached and apologized for her behavior. He told her he wasn't worried at all, but the truth was that he was a bit panicked. Shisha had calmed him down. She had that quiet presence. In moments like these, he couldn't let his emotions take over. Speaking honestly helped calm the whole party, even Aries. Slad wasn't happy that Shisha had left the hero party. That's when Etekica remembered something. When they found Remeli's hat, Shisha had mentioned something about a plan. Shisha was eavesdropping from behind a tree, though Slad seemed surprised. Etekica clarified that she didn't suspect her, but She was worried. Shisha's expression had been so cold, but she knew Shisha was kind. Like many thieves, she was greedy for money, but no matter how cold she acted, she had always secretly slipped coins into the pockets of the sick and injured. Slad said that sometimes Shisha had a cold, unreadable gaze, not aimed at anyone, which made him trust her. He didn't want to intrude until she decided to speak. She had always been like that, and they never regretted following her. Shisha, after hearing this, couldn't take it anymore and interrupted, saying that she had found a clue and they didn't have much time to waste. Etekica noticed how close they were and told Shisha that she seemed close to Slad, but Shisha didn't want to respond. That's when Slad noticed her blushing and asked her what was wrong. Then he realized she had heard them. After that, Shisha stood and told them that Remeli was safe because she found no evidence that she had been buried here. That was a relief. Then, Slad added that Remeli might be incapacitated. If she were conscious, she wouldn't have left the hat behind. Etekica asked if she might be seriously injured. Shisha said she found traces of blood, but since Remeli was still alive, healing magic would help. More importantly, the deep mark in the ground was Dishia's unique skill. A finishing blow, not a second strike. 50 years ago, the demon lord, Ushumgar, out of nowhere was the first of his kind. He aimed to create a better place for monsters. He dominated the demon race, incited the monsters to become ferocious, and declared war on the surface races. He flooded the world with poisonous fog called miasma through a curse. This curse turned the dead into the undead, as leaving corpses unattended puts them at risk of transforming into undead creatures. In this case, it seems that the saint performed the necessary rites. Typically, they would send a priest or someone from the faith class to perform these rites. As for the footprints, they indicate that a one-hit skill was likely used. Etekica wondered about this one-hit kill skill, and that if she really had this power, then no one would be able to defeat her. Slad told her that this wasn't true, as the saint wasn't a combat class, but a faith class, a pure support role. And while the one-hit kill skill is indeed powerful, the saint lacks crucial combat ability. Then he declared that this wouldn't hit the monsters, and that the footprints indicated two people most likely. Dishia was carrying Remeli. He explained to Etekica that fighting is taboo for Dishia, as unique skills are already sensitive. Shisha confirmed his words, and turned to them and told them that they had to hurry. The three of them mounted their horses and rushed off quickly. Shisha concluded that the two of them must have been in a very desperate situation to resort to using that skill. The place was in chaos. The monster had thrown Aries high into the air. Aries sat up and looked at it, wondering if this was some kind of rare species. The monster was flying above them. It was huge, 2 large wings and a very long tail. They continued to hit him. Remeli was giving it her all, wielding the wind blade, a spell especially effective against flying enemies. After all, she had once taken down a dragon with it. She stared at the monster, hoping it would fall, but deep down, she realized it wouldn't. Meanwhile, Dishia failed to control her hatred, and things spiraled out of control. The monster suddenly turned towards Remeli, who had fallen to the ground, screaming for help. Aries stood at a distance, watching silently. He didn't lift a finger, convinced that his teammate was already done for, especially since the monster hadn't eaten yet. He knew he should have acted earlier. The beast approached the trembling Remeli, who felt her end was near, but just in time, Dishia intervened, landing a critical strike with her unique skill that made the monster vanish instantly. Remeli collapsed, shaking, overwhelmed by a mix of relief and sorrow as she remembered Slad. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered his name again and again. Dishia stood beside her, knowing her friend was right. Slad had once thrown himself over her to protect her without hesitation. Memories of the times they shared with him came rushing back. How he made everything easier for them. Suddenly, Aries interrupted her thoughts with a sinister laugh, impressed by her ability to eliminate the monster. He mockingly told her that she was better suited for the combat class. Infuriated, Dishia asked coldly why he hadn't helped them, reminding him it was his duty as a part of the class. Aries replied smugly that his holy sword couldn't reach it from that distance. Dishia snapped, raising her voice, telling him that as a hero, he should have mastered Windblade at the very least. Aries apologized half-heartedly, then shifted his tone, insisting Windblade was just a basic spell, and that his holy sword was far more powerful. He showed no care for their fallen comrades, believing his magic alone was enough to defeat any enemy. Dishia slapped him hard across the face, cursing him with the harshest of words. Furious, Aries began to protest, but Dishia ignored him. She picked up Remeli and told him coldly that they would talk later. Dark thoughts began to cloud Aries' mind, thoughts of turning against his own teammates. Elsewhere, Etekica spotted a house just before Shisha did. Shisha bet that their friends were inside, but Slad noted that the footprints clearly led there. Still, he couldn't shake off the feeling. What had happened to the people of the mansion? As the rain began to fall, Shisha dismounted and moved towards Slad. Etekica hesitated, then asked if he was really going to enter. Slad, sensing something was wrong, asked what was bothering her. She couldn't quite put it into words, but the stillness of the spirits around her made her uneasy. Hearing that, Slad immediately asked Shisha to inspect the entrance. Etekica thought it might just be her imagination, but Slad told her to trust her instincts, that it was okay if nothing were there. Etekica blushed, touched by his words. Just then, Shisha returned from afar, confirming Etekica's fears. The mansion was actually a monster. Slad wasn't surprised. When Shisha asked how he had already knew, he explained. There were 3 known monsters that disguise themselves as buildings to lure prey. The first digests magical creatures. The second is a haunted mansion that traps the living inside and causes strange phenomena. And the third doesn't respond when you knock. It's called the Mimic Mansion. They retreated to a safer place to discuss everything. Shisha still couldn't believe Aries and Dishia would fall for such a trap, but Slad reassured her that it was impossible for a saint with a constant undead detection to mistake a haunted mansion. And if there were no signs of their return, then what they were facing was the third type of monster, the Nightmare Fairy, a truly unique and terrifying creature. Slad entered the mansion and was amazed by its enormous size. He looked up at the ceiling, where a huge chandelier hung. As he stared at the ceiling, someone greeted him. It was a beautiful girl glowing with a light like that of a fairy. She opened her arms and welcomed him to what she called the Dream Mansion. In surprise, Slad replied, dream? And asked her if this place was truly a dream. She answered that he was right. He had traveled in a dream. Then he asked her curiously who she was, and she told him that she was the one and only Nightmare Fairy. After he told them the story, Shisha shouted in disbelief and asked him if they were like the terrifying creatures known from myths. There were only 16 known unique monsters, each possessing extraordinary powers unmatched by any other being. Here, Slad told them that Nightmare Fairies appear in different forms, and in some lands, they're revered as kings. The real Nightmare Fairy isn't even inside this mansion. They're only projecting their avatars into the real world. Shisha screamed in fear, saying that she had touched the door just a minute ago and it felt like a heartbeat. Slad reassured her that everything would be fine. Shisha shouted again and asked him what he meant by thinking he thinks it'll be fine. So he explained to her, saying that he meant it's said to be harmless, so touching it should generally be safe. Shisha calmed down once she understood what he meant and realized it wouldn't be affected by the Demon Lord's poisonous miasma. Then, Slad explained to her that it's not a friendly monster, and that it's hard to say that from their perspective, because returning from a Nightmare's Fairy dream depends on luck. So, in principle, whoever enters the mansion never wakes up again. When Shisha heard all this, she told them that she was going to leave. Slad asked her how she could abandon her comrades in their current situation. Then Etekica grabbed her and told her that even though she said that, it was impossible. She also told her that a unique monster is basically like the Demon Lord. She wondered why even the Demon Lord was involved here. Shisha shouted that the Demon Lord, the one who plunged the world into chaos through deadly miasma and massacres, was actually the weakest of the unique monsters, the 16th pillar. Then she asked if they recognized how dangerous that was. Etekica responded in shock, asking how the Demon Lord could be the weakest. Slad informed them that the Nightmare Fairy is the 8th pillar, which means she's roughly in the middle in terms of strength. Shisha gave in to them, saying that the Demon Lord isn't a concern yet, and that she's just a newbie. Then she turned to Etekica and asked if she could come back if luck was on her side. Etekica calmed her down and told them to relax. Slad thought to himself that he didn't know about the other two, but he didn't think Aries could handle this. Slad was thinking and realized that people often believe the dreams shown by nightmare fairies are nightmares. But in reality, they are shown dreams of the ideal that person envisions. That's when he understood why Aries is known as the beridden hero. Etekica then told Shisha that this wasn't the time to be satisfied. Slad was pleased with what he realized and told them, "Well, I think everything will work out." Shisha asked him what gave him the right to say that, and he told her that his old party had managed to defeat a unique monster before. The two girls shouted in shock and were told by Slad that their voices were very loud. Shisha informed him that it was the first time she had heard that. Meanwhile, Etekica was looking at him, her thoughts confused. Slad told her that it wasn't just because of him, he was simply there, and that's what made him famous on the old continent. Etekica then told him that she finally understood why Slad's rank was SSS, and it was the same for Shisha. Slad informed them that this time, they didn't have a fully prepared party like before, so bringing both of them together would be risky. Slad told them that he would speak to the Nightmare Fairy first and try to negotiate to get everyone back. Etekica looked at him in surprise, wondering how he would speak with such a unique monster. Then, Shisha agreed with him, telling him it was the best plan and that she would protect him. Etekica wanted to say something, but Slad interrupted her and stated that she definitely couldn't enter. He advised her that if he failed, he wanted the kingdom to know that the hero was captured by the Nightmare Fairy, along with Shisha, of course. Slad turned towards the mansion. Etekica apologized and told him that she wasn't useful when it mattered. Slad reassured her that she didn't need to think that way, and told her that if it weren't for Etekica, he might have been stuck in a dream without realizing it. Shisha said the same, wandering along with her. He then continued, saying that every party has its roles. Etekica had played her role perfectly. Slad headed towards the mansion and told them that from now on, it was his role. He reached for the mansion's door and thought he needed to knock. Slad knocked, and the Nightmare Fairy welcomed him immediately. He knocked on the door 3 times, and suddenly, he found a girl standing in front of him. He wondered if he were really in a dream, and if so, then the girl he must be talking to is the Nightmare Fairy. He told her that he had come to talk to her. The fairy started circling around him, but Slad was amazed by what he was experiencing. Even if it was just a dream, he remembered that once someone enters the mansion, they forget it's a dream. Maybe because those who enter don't want to drown in dreams. While he was thinking, the fairy stopped circling and came closer to him. She told him it were a lovely wish that he wanted to talk to her, so she had to give him a special welcome. She raised both her fists into the air, and in an instant, 2 large tables appeared, covered with food, toys, and musical instruments. Slad was amazed by the scene he found himself in the middle of. Then, the music started playing. She laughed while Slad was still in awe. He was then told that he could now eat as much as he wanted. Slad put his hand behind his head and told her he knew that this was just a dream. She was surprised and asked if he was underestimating her dream. She had told him that when that happens, the dream will affect his real body. Drinking water quenches his thirst. Eating food fills his stomach. And if he dies here, he truly dies. She added that he couldn't be immortal because he didn't have the desire for immortality. Slad thought to himself and realized that if wishes could come true in the dream, then, on the other hand, unwanted things don't appear. Slad smiled and was amazed, wondering if it was really as he had been told. Then he was shocked as he ate some food. Its taste was amazing. She asked him if he liked sweets, explaining that the nightmare fairy was simply a creature that wanted to make those who visited her palace happy, as the legend says. No wonder no one wakes up. Slad was stunned. He'd almost fallen into her trap even. He then asked her how he could wake up from the dream. She answered that it was easy. He just had to wish to wake up. Then she told him that she didn't think it was necessary because, in her dream, he would live the peaceful life he desired. He replied that there were people waiting for him. She asked him if he was that person. Midier told Slad that if he hadn't used the Adventurer's Pleasure service, this could have been a disaster. The fairy thanked him, then called Slad the Traveler twice and asked him what he wanted to talk about. Slad replied that she knew how to read people's hearts well. He told her that he wanted to awaken the heroes who had come to her palace, though the fairy corrected him, telling him that it was those themselves that had to want to wake up. Though the fairy read Slad's thoughts and liked his idea, she told him that whatever he was thinking of was wonderful, and that he would get it, and that his wish would come true. But she wanted him to tell her the wish himself. He agreed and said, "Make me appear in everyone's dreams." Then the fairy disappeared. The place around him changed. Slad wondered where he was. And suddenly, the fairy appeared behind him, flying close to him. She told him that she was very happy, that it was something very kind of him to invite her to enter everyone's dreams. Slad replied that it was something only she would understand, and asked her if she were really that happy. She told him that, despite him knowing her, only a few people wished to meet her in their dreams. Slad made the connection that she could only show them what they had wanted to see. She told Slad that this was the dream of the witch's child. Slad felt bad for intruding on others' dreams like this, but she reassured her that this child was the most passionate about meeting him. They strolled to a large mechanical house. In the distance, 2 children are playing, and a familiar little witch stands before them. Etekica and Shisha stayed outside. Etekica wanted to know why Slad had kept his skill a secret from everyone. Shisha asked her why she was so bothered by it all, and Etekica replied that ever since she heard about the hero team, she had wondered. She figured Slad must have known how difficult things would be without his powerful skill. Shisha remained silent, knowing that Slad didn't really care about skills. Etekica continued, saying she hadn't noticed at first that her strength had increased. She just assumed the spirits were in a good mood. Shisha explained that this was the tricky part about Slad's skill. It had taken her a whole month to realize she was receiving buffs, and she only recently discovered his skills also included debuffs. As for hiding it from them, it made them feel like he didn't trust them enough to tell them. But in the end, it was just Slad. Besides, he had told Etekica without hesitation. Shisha reminded her that he had also exposed his ability to the public when saving her, which made her think that keeping it a secret wasn't really important to him. Etekica wondered if he might have another reason for keeping it a secret. As she was about to say what she thought, Shisha looked up at her, eager to hear it. But Etekica just laughed and admitted that she didn't really know. Then she said it was impossible for him to hurt them like that. Shisha then asked if Slad had a crush on her. Etekica blushed and told her that's a bit too much, but Shisha found the idea amusing. Etekica still couldn't believe how humble Slad had been, despite having such amazing skills. Shisha explained that Slad genuinely believed he was ordinary. Etekica was surprised. After all, he was S-rank. Shisha understood where she was coming from and asked if she could imagine herself without her skill. Etekica said she couldn't imagine not being able to talk to her spirit friends. Shisha added that it's only natural for her to have that skill, and that rare and unique skills are part of the individual. They only appear at birth and reflect your personality. The same goes for Slad, who sees both of his skills as perfectly normal. But Etekica still believed he should realize how amazing he was when using them. Shisha clarified that Slad never uses his skills intentionally. They're completely automatic, unlike normal skills which require the user's will to activate. That's why people are unaware of their activation and take responsibility for it. But since Slad's skills are involuntary, he doesn't feel them at all. Etekica realized then that he was completely unaware. Shisha confirmed that Slad doesn't see himself as special, which made her feel sorry for him. Etekica, on the other hand, was frustrated that she didn't know about his skills sooner. Shisha added that he was free from his burden of abilities and wouldn't be consumed by them. Etekica started to think that maybe Shisha had some amazing skill too, and asked her about it. But Shisha avoided the question, said she didn't have one, and started eating, while Etekica stared at her with a bit of envy towards everyone's powers. Meanwhile, inside the dream where Remeli was enjoying her time, Slad noticed that the woman standing there was wearing Remeli's hat. The fairy told him that she might be Remeli's late mother. That's when Slad realized that one of the girls must have been Remeli. But he wondered why neither of them had pale blue skin, since Remeli was half demon, and both had regular human skin. The fairy asked if he hadn't figured it out yet, and that's when he realized this was Remeli's wish. She wanted to be born a normal human. Slad stepped forward toward the mother. Hello, lovely weather we're having, he said. The fairy was mesmerized by his greeting and complimented him, making Slad feel like she was going to praise anything he did. The mother welcomed him and asked him what brought him here. That's when Remeli spotted him and ran into his arms. He asked her if she was Remeli, despite her cheerful and energetic demeanor, so different from how he knew her. She confirmed this, and he told her that he admired her. The young Remeli was thrilled, but he told her that this was a dream, and he had to take her back. Will you come with me? He asked. But Remeli refused. Slad was shocked, but he realized it would be cruel to destroy such a happy dream, especially since the Nightmare Fairy posed no threat. He told them he would come back later and apologized for intruding. But then Remeli shouted, asking if he was really going to leave. She said she'd reconsider and admitted that she wanted to live with her mother. Her mother spoke up, and the child felt the same way. One of the girls here held Slad's hand. He was surprised by her reaction and wondered if Remeli's younger sister had been the same age when she died. He knelt down, patted both of their heads, and told them he had to check on the others. Then told her that he's not Remeli's dream, and he apologized. As he walked away, something happened. The door closed behind him, trapping them in a room. Remeli called out to him in a cold voice. She did not want him to go. He turned around, sweating in fear. Now, she looked like the Remeli he knew. Same age, same clothes, but her skin was still human. He asked, "You really hate being half-demon, huh?" She confirmed this, and said that if she had been born human, none of this would have happened. Slad wondered if she had painful memories that made her want to deny herself. Then he asked, "Do you remember what you said before?" She replied that she would never forget. She remembered how people treated her cruelly, said hurtful things, avoided her, and rejected her friendship. Slad had been the only one who accepted her and her other half. She asked him to say it again. This was the same room where Slad had once thought he was saying an obvious thing. But for her, the words he said meant everything. He reached out to his hands to hers and said, "You can be yourself." She reached back, shook his hand while wiping her tears, and he asked her, "Have you remembered what you want to do?" She told him she wanted to defeat the Demon King so that the half-demons like her could be accepted. Slad encouraged her and was happy she was back. He knew it would be hard, even if she defeated the king. Discrimination wouldn't just disappear. But even knowing that, she chose to fight the Demon King. And that was what he admired most about her. They walked together toward the door, where there stood the fairy, telling them it was time to wake up from the dream. Slad and Remeli, who were holding hands, stood stunned in front of the mansion door, deep in the forest. In the morning of the forest, Remeli smiled at him and greeted him with a morning salutation. But suddenly she felt shy. She had been so bold in her dreams, but this was her true self, not a dream. Slad pat her head indicating she wasn't wearing a hat. At that moment, Shisha appeared, having not met Remeli in a long time. Remeli was surprised and asked where she had been all this time. Shisha replied that it was a long story. Remeli then handed her the hat, which was in a deplorable condition. There was a girl with Shisha, whom Remeli hadn't noticed before. Etekica raised her hand and said that if she asked a brownie spirit, she could get it fixed right away. Remeli didn't know her though, and wondered who this girl was. Etekica introduced herself as Slad's new companion. Remeli's eyes filled with tears, and Slad said he understood what she meant, but he didn't know what to do. Suddenly, Etekica took Remeli's hand and said that she couldn't help because there were no homes there. But if she could get help from a spirit of some house, the brownie, it could be possible. Remeli felt overjoyed as, thanks to Etekica, she would be able to get her hat back. Before they returned to the mansion, Shisha asked Slad to share information. They all gathered around a fire pit in the forest and began talking about Aries, discussing how it was expected that he would have kicked out Slad. Shisha, who was lying on a swing, said that even though Aries could be predicted, he was still quite shocking. Remeli shared everything that would happen, saying that due to Aries' provocation, they had to fight a rare wyvern dragon with only the three of them. She had almost died, but Dishia saved her with a no-second strike while carrying her. Dishia kept cheering her on. Aries had insisted on stopping at the mansion, though Dishia had opposed this, but she had been pushed to rest. Etekica then said that the hero left a terrible impression even before she met him, while Remeli said that Aries was the worst kind of man. Meanwhile, Slad told them that they should understand that Aries was still the hero. Remeli agreed, while Shisha remained silent during this debate. Etekica still didn't fully understand and wondered if the hero was really that important. At that point, Remeli began to explain, saying that there was a demon lord in this world, and that this demon lord was immortal. Etekica was amazed by this. Remeli continued, saying that even if the newcomer was weaker, he was unique. Shisha then broke her silence, saying that they were on a completely different scale than mortal surface dwellers like themselves. Remeli continued, explaining that the demon lord enveloped the world in a miasma, making monsters more vicious. The underground race, now known as demons, ruled and incited war against the surface dwellers. She said that monsters had been somewhat friendly in the past, and that to defeat the immortal demon lord, they needed the holy sword of the hero. And that hero was Aries. Remeli finished her story, and Etekica said she now understood the situation and was deeply sorry for them. Remeli reassured her that Etekica wasn't wrong, and that the demon lord and Aries are now part of the same story. Etekica then began to despise Aries as well as the demon lord, wondering if Aries was really the only hero capable of saving this world. Remeli paused for a moment and said that it wasn't necessarily so, and that the hero's qualities were a rare skill, not a unique one. She said that perhaps there were others besides Aries. Shisha, stepping off the swing, said that it sounded impossible, and that heroes' qualities weren't unique, but they were extremely rare, like one in several hundred years. Remeli looked at her sadly and said that that was definitely true, secretly wishing that there had been a case of a hero appearing in the same era. But she didn't want to lose hope. She then silently looked at Slad, hoping that he might be a hero. Slad used to see himself as incompetent and just an ordinary person. A hero only in his own imagination, and currently unemployed. At that moment, Shisha pointed out to the others the things Slad had actually accomplished. Not only had he awakened from the nightmare, but he also succeeded in bringing Remeli back with them. She then wondered aloud if that might make him a legend or something like that. But Slad told her that he had succeeded thanks to the fairy, who was extremely helpful. He then asked them to keep it all a secret and not to make it public. At that point, Shisha approached him asking for money to stay quiet. He started to chase her, begging her to give him a discount in exchange for her silence, but she told him her decision was already made. Then, Remeli interrupted them and announced that she would also leave Aries and join Slad's team. Shisha asked if that was okay, as they wouldn't be able to defeat the beast without the sacred hero's sword. Remeli thought Shisha's resolve to defeat the villain had weakened and that she had given up. But Shisha denied this. telling her she would definitely find another way. Then she fell silent and smiled. Slad understood what she meant to do, and asked her why she had made him go after Aries if this had been her plan all along. Shisha hadn't anticipated the appearance of the winged dragon and the nightmare fairy. She said she had deeply regretted it when she saw Remeli's hat, and admitted that her understanding had been very naive. She then apologized. Remeli didn't understand what they were talking about, and even Etekica looked confused. Shisha then turned to Slad and asked for his answer, as she had already started to understand a little of what had happened. He interrupted her and said he had deliberately saved her at the right moment. Then he smiled and told her he had wanted Aries to reflect on his actions, to make him understand the importance of companionship. All the girls were shocked by what Slad said. Shisha then hit him and told him that what he had done was wrong, because she had planned for both Dishia and Remeli to turn their back on Aries. Slad didn't understand why she had done that, so she told him that both of them wanted to defeat the monster. But the theory would collapse if it turned out that Aries couldn't do it. She added that no one would want to follow a hero who couldn't defeat evil. Slad was surprised. Aries is weak? Shisha got angrier and continued to hit him, telling him he needed to better understand his own abilities. This made Remeli curious about what she meant, so Shisha explained everything to her. Remeli was overjoyed and couldn't believe what she had heard about her hero, Slad. And so, another person who knew the truth about Slad joined the team. Then, Slad stood up and told them it was time to bring Dishia back. Shisha asked how they would defeat the monster without the sacred sword. Slad replied that someday, they'll form a party to defeat the monster. But before all that, they needed to bring Dishia back. She asked them to promise her that they would come back, and they all left together after Slad thanked them all. Then, he headed towards where Dishia was, promising them that he would bring her back. The battle between them began, and he didn't understand why he was even fighting his comrade, Dishia. Slad stood on the mountain, looking at the mansion from afar. Suddenly, Nai welcomed him back. Slad was surprised and said that he wasn't inside the mansion. Nai responded that she knew he had wished for and pointed her hand towards the mansion, saying it was wonderful for the vast world to be just a dream for the saints. She was very broad-minded. She entered without a hitch. Slad wondered if he could appear in dreams and what she meant by standards. He turned to leave, saying that he understood and thanked Nai-chan. Nai was surprised when Slad pronounced her full name. She thought he would understand, since she was the Nightmare Fairy, and using her full name required a lot of letters. Slad asked if she didn't like her name. She answered that she loved it completely, and from now on, he could call her Nai-chan. Slad wondered if that was some sort of self-indulgent. He thought his thoughts were completely transparent, then asked Nai-chan if she truly didn't know herself. She replied that all she knew was his desire. Slad fell silent, thinking that the Nightmare Fairy in a dream didn't have a fixed form. He wondered if it was possible for her to take the form of his desires in dreams. He tried to wish for the opposite of his companion through the conversation, so perhaps the borrowed image of a fairy who grants wishes from a story he read long ago. Nai-chan said this was right, and her goal was to show happy dreams to everyone. She didn't need a specific form. After all, she was a unique monster. But through her, he could communicate with his true self. The joy she felt was real, and not a part of his dream. She was very happy, because, thanks to him, one of her dreams had come true. Slad wondered about her dream. She smiled, and said that she wanted to finish the story about the dream mansion and go fulfill his dream. On his search for Dishia, Slad lost his way a little, then finally reached the mansion. Upon entering, he noticed statues lined up in a row and felt a solemn atmosphere. Along the way, he met the monks and realized he was getting closer to a temple. He stood in front of the door and felt that it was a terrifying matter. He entered the temple and realized there were no priests there. Everyone was a monk. The monks specialized in combat in the battle class. They came and went from the temple, but weren't part of the faith class. These monks trained hard in the temple's yard. Even though he knew it was a dream, the scene felt so surreal to Slad. Suddenly, on his way inside the temple, he spotted Dishia. She was training in combat movements. Slad stood in awe in front of her. She looked exactly like the Dishia he knew. Still, that beautiful girl with greenish blonde hair and blue eyes. But Dishia wasn't wearing her usual sacred attire. Like the other monks, she was dressed in training clothes, though the gloves were the only common thing. Even though he wasn't very devout, whenever he saw her praying, he felt a sacred emotion. But now he felt nothing. This wouldn't be as easy as it was with Remeli. This dream went down into Dishia's inner self, a realm she should only tread into. He had crashed this dream as an outsider. That's what Nai-chan meant by the difference between being wanted and not. Slad stopped thinking and called out to Dishia, who stopped her training, turned to him, and then attacked him, knocking him to the ground. Slad was amazed by the beauty and precision of her spinning kick, and thought that she shouldn't have mastered it in reality. That was her ideal form, and he should be obliterated instantly. Quickly, he got up from the ground, thinking he could dodge her, meaning the auto-debilitation had been successfully activated. As Slad fled from Dishia, who was pursuing him, he felt once again that he was unwelcome. Still, he couldn't help but wonder if his skills might actually work in the dream world. That theory had become crystal clear to him. He pondered what this could mean for the so-called uninvited strike, and whether he could really hold up against such instant death attacks. But then, glancing back, he realized it wasn't the time to be saying things like that. Death in dreams was directly linked to death in reality. That meant Dishia could die because of his skills. Slad stopped. Dishia managed to trap him up against a tree, closing in on him. He asked why she was hitting him, reminding her that they were supposed to be friends. She paused for a moment, gritted her teeth, and admitted that this was exactly why she wanted to punch him. Then she stepped away from him. Slad shouted, begging her to stop and claiming that this was his fault. But Dishia called out his lie, saying he didn't truly believe that. She dropped to her knees, broken and confused. Slad told her he still didn't understand why he was being attacked like this. Dishia answered that he had left her hanging without a care. He had just vanished without a word. She told him she had trusted him. Looking up at him, she examined his face carefully and declared that he wasn't the real Slad. She stood up, while Slad tried to make sense of what had triggered such a reaction. Yet it seemed the hostility between them had faded. In dreams, he thought, people might unconsciously try to eliminate anything that threatens the coherence of the dream, just to keep it alive. At least, that's how it seemed. As they walked together, Dishia remarked that his story about escaping had been nothing but just Aries' lie. In truth, he had been cast out. It was true that he had vanished, and without so much of a word. Slad remained silent, lowering his head in thought. He had dreamt of Remeli, and despite them his comrades, he had disregarded their trust. He believed his existence was only justified by his skills, thinking it made no difference whether he was there or not. But in truth, they had seen him for who he was. Finally breaking the silence, Slad said that this time, he wouldn't vanish on his own. Dishia, confident and unwavering, told him that of course he would. After all, he had already taken a punch. When they reached the mansion, Dishia asked whether it was the only species monster. She had heard that this was supposed to be a dream. If he was trying to fool her, she insisted, he could at least come up with a better lie. Slad thought to himself that Dishia was incredibly stubborn, but assured her that it was, in fact, true. Dishia noted that the dream seemed far too orderly. Dreams, she argued, were supposed to be more whimsical and hairy. Slad suggested that she was going to keep questioning everything, and that, because of that, she might as well come with him and check out the temple. She went with him in silence. If this were Aries, she said, she would have totally refused with all her might. But since it was Slad, she would let it slide. Slad mused inwardly that even Dishia had to think the temple packed with monks was a bit strange. Dishia wondered aloud if the temple wasn't just an ordinary one. Suddenly, a group of priests appeared, catching Slad off guard. He didn't want to accept that this was a dream, but his subconscious made him feel this way. There was something strange about the scene. When he tried to speak to one of the priests, the man didn't even look at him. The cold indifference frustrated Slad. Everyone seemed to be ignoring him. Dishia suggested that they were probably busy, but Slad had hoped for at least a simple greeting. He thought that perhaps Dishia was staying silent to avoid drawing attention. Anyone who had grown up in a temple should be able to imitate at least one or two priests flawlessly, he thought. That led him to suspect that the priests ignoring them was Dishia's wish. Dishia asked him if everything was all right, saying she wanted to return to training. Slad looked at her curiously. She clarified, it was just training in the garden, after all. She was a monk, in the end. Slad remembered himself in the brave party of Aries. He had assumed he recalled his role in all of this quite naturally, but that was far from the truth. Then he told Dishia that, after all, she was a saint. Dishia remembered when the saint gave her father a sum of money to take her to the Holy Church, and her parents agreed to it. At that time, Slad had told her that she was a saint, but Dishia told him that she had always been a monk. Slad lowered his head, closed his eyes, and told her that if he should continue letting her dream like that, then he said that she deserved freedom and the opportunity to choose as well. For the goal of defeating the Demon King, that was a wish everyone had. Dishia thought that if she did her best, everyone would smile at her. They would say she had saved them and that they would be truly thankful for her. Then Slad asked her if himself was really part of everyone. He asked if she remembered when she healed his wounds while he was protecting Remeli. At that time, he was not the target. He had been seriously hurt because of auto debuff had not been activated. Dishia told him that he was such a handful, always taking risks like a mere baggage carrier. He thanked her for that time. She said she was just doing what was natural. Looking back, Dishia had always been like that. When thanked, a simple "you're welcome" would have been enough. Healing wounds and saving those in need was what a saint should do in the end. That was the opposite of Aries, and for that reason, Slad had the worst relationship with the hero in the party. But he was happy when she remembered that, even in her dream. He was happy that she remained so kind. Dishia said that as a monk, she couldn't use healing magic. She turned to the group of saints and told them that she would become a saint. They gathered around her, asking her to grant them her blessing and to defeat the hero and the Demon King. It was a normal scene when visiting the temple. Dishia had forgotten the attitude of the priests towards her in the dream. She collapsed on the ground, crying, and Slad was sorry for reminding her of that. You couldn't be a saint unless you possessed the qualities of a saint, just like the hero. From the moment she was born into this world, she was only seen as the saint. Even if the person didn't want it, the world desired her to be so. Dishia truly wanted to save the world more than anyone else. For this reason, it was reflected, even in Slad's dreams. She clearly remembered that she had been a saint, but she had the choice. Dishia bowed in front of Slad. He said that she didn't need to force herself to forget. If she remembered, she could choose what she wanted to be, either a saint or a monk. She offered him a drink while they were talking. He said that since she didn't want to become a saint, wouldn't it be normal to want to utilize a skill like No Second Strike? And then after becoming a combat job, she could focus on martial arts as an option. Dishia interrupted though and said that for sure he was the only one who would grant her such a choice now and forever. It was a comfort that only really he could provide. She now remembered that he was the only one who had ever told her that. It was only him. Slad told her that his answer was the same as it had been at that time. Dishia climbed onto the platform to address the priests. She said that defeating the Demon King was their long-standing wish, and as the Saint, she would fulfill her mission and certainly lead them to peace after the long war with the demon race. Slad listened to her speech, a smile of joy on his face. The old Dishia he knew had returned. Slad had been sleeping, but Dishia woke him up, saying that morning had come. Slad woke up, surprised, and realized that he had been sleeping on her knee. He honestly said that he really thought it was a dream, and he hadn't known that she wanted to become a monk so badly. Dishia said that if he asked her if she wanted to become a monk, it would have been a bit strange. She had always acted because someone else wished for it. Everything she did seemed like an obligation. She added that she wanted to save those who were suffering. She had always wondered if that was really her own will. She just wanted to have her own desires, that's all. On the way back, the two met their friends in front of the river, where they were fishing. Remeli and Etekica were very happy to see Slad and went straight to him to hug him. The girls welcomed Dishia and exchanged pleasantries. Dishia said they needed to wake Aries up quickly, but Remeli disagreed, saying that Aries should be sealed there. Shisha also supported her opinion, while both Slad and Etekica stood there, astonished. Then Dishia said it was true that Aries was a worthless man who couldn't be fixed, but that had been obvious a long time ago. She also said they couldn't get rid of the only person who could defeat the Demon King based on their personal feelings. Remeli felt sad and hugged Etekica, saying that Dishia was tougher today than usual. Dishia continued, saying that guiding the hero and saving the world was her mission. So what if Aries was strong because of Slad's skill? The fact that only the hero could wield the holy sword hadn't changed. There was no alternative hero, as Remeli had suggested. She said they should control the hero to defeat the Demon King. Shisha told her that she had always thought she was stubborn, but not to this extent, and she ended her words there. Dishia felt sorry and then stood up, addressing Slad, who had remained silent all this time, and asked him what he thought of this matter. Slad, who had been eating grilled fish, spoke up and said that he would definitely wake Aries up. Dishia felt happy and asked if he would ever rejoin the hero party. Slad told her that if Aries said it was fine, then he would be fine with that. However, there was one condition. Slad wanted to keep his skills a secret from Aries. Dishia screamed at him, saying that in the end, Aries had become arrogant because he kept his skills a secret, and if he had revealed them, he wouldn't be like this. Shisha tried to calm the situation down, but Dishia was at the peak of her anger and continued shouting at Slad. She said that revealing skills wasn't that bad. She was sure he had gone through tough times, but skills should be used properly for the people. She asked him if he was unhappy because he was treated like a power-up tool, or if he prioritized his own interests over the fate of the world. Slad was taken aback and said that he didn't ever think about it that way. Then Dishia asked him to clarify, and Slad told her that if Aries discovered his skills, he would never have the willpower to fight. Dishia sat alone beneath the tree, thinking deeply about Slad's words. Later, the group of friends gathered, and Slad told them that they wouldn't be able to fully understand what happened in the past, because even he hadn't fully understood it back then. He began recounting his story, saying that before meeting Aries, a friend had told him that he should join the hero party. At first, he thought that was out of consideration for his situation at the time, but eventually, he realized he had been wrong. The image of Aries he heard about was shocking. Aries believed he alone was capable of saving the world. Naturally, he was praised for that. He acted as though he had the right to do whatever he wanted. Aries believed he could defeat the Demon King on his own, and forming a party was just something easy for him. He saw his companions as tools, using them carelessly for the world, and only acted for the sake of praise. That kind of excessive self-love was what shaped this hero. Slad continued, saying there had to be at least some decency in Aries. Otherwise, why would he risk his life in battles that could kill him? At that point, Shisha commented that if this analysis were true, it was likely that Aries didn't believe he could die at all. After all, he thought he was the main character of this world. Dishia then said that everyone has moments like that, saying that she used to think the world revolved around her when she was younger. Slad replied that Aries was still stuck in that mindset, that he had never truly grown since the moment he was recognized as a hero. That, Slad said, was his friend's perspective. Shisha admitted that she could understand Aries being childish on the inside, but wondered how that tied into keeping Slad's skill a secret. Slad explained that if his skills were fully automatic, it meant that things wouldn't always go according to Aries' wishes. Remeli and Etekica still didn't understand. Slad then told him that Aries simply couldn't accept the idea of not defeating enemies with his own power. Dishia brought up the fact that Aries still accepted enhancement magic from her and Remeli. Slad clarified that it was only because Aries allowed it to happen. He had the choice to refuse, and that made all the difference. Dishia found that childish reason, and tried to even retract her words, but she still thought it was a very silly reason. Slad said that while it might seem trivial to them, for Aries, letting the world fall into the Demon King's hands was something fine. To him, it was a huge deal. This was the source of Aries' power. His pride simply wouldn't allow it. The one chosen by the Lord couldn't accept seeing himself as a useless burden. He'd rather let the Demon King take him down than live with such a reality. Dishia became upset. She said that was a lie, that was all too bizarre. At that time, had Aries really only been raised solely to save the world alongside the hero? Slad lowered his head and said that he wanted to believe in a hero who would stand against the world. But he had been too naive and too soft. He stood up and gently patted Remeli on the head. He said that he had reached his conclusion through the situation, and that he would remain silent about his skill, even after Aries wakes up. In the end, both girls agreed that they would wake Aries up anyways. Dishia closed her eyes, thinking about what she should do after hearing Slad's story. Etekica saw her like that, and asked if she was confused too. Dishia admitted that she was lost, maybe confused. She'd always acted to fulfill others' wishes, and now, it felt oddly refreshing. Etekica advised her that in times like these, it's better to focus on a clear, near goal rather than a distant one. Then, half joking, she said maybe they should just take a swing at Aries. She quickly apologized, not expecting a child like her to say something like that, especially after what happened to Remeli. She added that she was sure that Slad had a reason for wanting Aries to wake up, something beyond just saving the world. Dishia interrupted her, saying it was all very strange. Dishia was surprised and said that even though she'd only met Etekica today, it felt like Etekica had been a part of the hero party forever. With excitement, Dishia declared that she was great at hitting things, and once they woke Aries up, they would all take a swing at him together. The atmosphere lightened, and the friends started to have fun. Slad remained puzzled and astonished. Finally, Dishia asked Slad to count on her when it came to dealing with Aries. Slad closed his eyes and said softly that it was a heavy responsibility. The group made their way to the mansion. Slad opened the gate, surprised to find Nye already there. She asked him about the next dream. Slad asked her if it had been difficult to appear. Nye explained that there was a reason she wanted to meet the witch's child. She said that the saint's child had the capacity to accept others, but the hero's child had neither. Slad asked her to check it and see if she could truly see such things. She said that she could, but strongly advised against it. Even if a dream seems beautiful to those watching, sometimes it might look like a nightmare to others. Slad said this was exactly why his dreams never overlapped with others, and that public dreams should be personal ones. Nye then asked if they should simply stop altogether, adding that some people should remain asleep. But Slad replied that that person could still have a happy dream and won't make anyone unhappy in reality. Nye disagreed, saying that it doesn't work like that. Slad told her that Aries was the only one capable of defeating the Demon King. Nye then asked Slad whether or not that was the case. What if there were other ways to defeat the Demon King? What would he do then? Slad simply replied that they will wake Aries. I was stunned. Slad continued, explaining that they hadn't reached a decision about what to do with Aries, but they had all agreed on one thing. He had to wake up. And once he did, they had also agreed that everyone should take a swing at him. He questioned why Aries had the right to retreat into a dream that suited him. He just couldn't see it that way. Nye felt saddened by his words. Slad noticed and asked her why she looked so upset. Nye, caught off guard, tried to deny her feelings, but Slad gently pointed out that it was written all over her face. Embarrassed by how transparent she was to him, Nye tried to hide her feelings, but Slad told her that she could read thoughts, and she said that he wanted to understand her worries too. Suddenly, the atmosphere changed. The space around them turned into a starlit sky. Nye told him that this night sky was her true self. A beautiful dream. Every star represented someone's dream, still twinkling brightly within her. Slad was amazed that she carried everything of that. Nye placed her hand on his mouth to silence him. She told him that it hurt her to call them as victims. All she wanted was for everyone to have joyful dreams. Reality is harsh. There were lots of things that didn't go as planned. As Slad tried to respond, she stopped him again. She said she understood what he was trying to say, but the truth was that in this world, many lives end without reward. She told him she had a dream. She said her dream wasn't for viewers, but for those who embrace. Her eyes sparkled. She smiled. And she said that her dream was to invite everyone in this world into her dream and let them keep dreaming forever. Slad stood in awe, watching as Nye began to leave. She told him that what she wanted was something he could never do, and not an exception. He tried to stop her, wanting to say something about her dream, but she didn't listen. She walked away and closed the doors behind her. Meanwhile, in the kingdom of Saywood, a messenger bird delivered an urgent letter to a guard. The guard rushed to King Kashiu Saywood Bellcraft and delivered the report. It was from the Holy Maiden of the Hero Party. The report stated that the Hero Party had encountered the unique Nightmare Fairy and successfully captured her on their return to the capital. Thanks to the effort of the noble thief, who worked separately, they succeeded in rescuing the witch, the saint, and the hero for the third time. However, the one carrying the baggage in the party had fallen unconscious during the mission. As a result, the kingdom was requested to take immediate action. However, the hero remained fully conscious. At that moment, King Saywood interrupted the guard, wondering about the baggage carrier. Dishia woke up in terror. The dream mansion had vanished. The rest of the girls awoke to see what had happened. They found Slad lying on the ground, and Aries sprawled not far from him. Dishia couldn't understand what this meant, but Remeli wondered if this could have been a failure. Shisha remained silent, but Etekica said it didn't necessarily mean failure. The dream mansion had disappeared, yet they had returned. Something must have happened in the dream. Shisha finally spoke, saying that both of them appeared to be alive, yet she was worried they hadn't awakened. She was thinking that Slad might be in a coma, and perhaps unable to wake up, even with Dishia's magic, forced awakening. She was confused and anxious, unable to comprehend what had happened to Slad. That dream had been truly heartbreaking. It meant they truly could not meet anyone. Slad, speaking with Nye as she walked towards the door, was wondering about this. Nye said he was right. He told her that dreams don't overlap. Even if he greets someone in a dream, it was only a monologue in their mind. And that dreams are only an eternal loneliness. Yet everyone lives happily, unaware of the truth. Nye thought that the dream she showed him was the ideal world, the way things should be. She smiled and joyfully said that she thought that way until she spoke with him. Slad was surprised by her words. What she said was true, after all. He had entered her dream mansion and talked to her without losing his memory. Slad was amazed he was the only one who had spoken with Nye, as no one had even tried to talk to her before. She said that actually, there were those who tried to speak with her, but only Slad, when he entered the mansion, didn't forget that this was a dream, and all others had forgotten the very premises of dialogue in a dream. She continued by saying that forgotten wishes cannot be seen in dreams, and that she was never really able to meet anyone. Slad saw how happy Nye was with his arrival, but he himself was also very happy, immensely happy. Nye said that even so, he talked to her and held onto the desire to meet her. He had fulfilled her other dream, where speaking to a real person wasn't just a dream, but something truly joyful. She never had such an idea. Perhaps her actions had saved some souls, but in reality, maybe she had taken someone precious from many others. She said that with tears in her eyes. Slad approached her and said he was sorry that the dream she showed him was what it was. Even though he believed kindness was something else entirely, he told her she truly was a kind soul. Nye was surprised, but Slad said that was a good thing. Maybe, he said, the reason he hadn't forgotten Nye was due to the fully automatic weakening, and that the illusion of dreams as reality wasn't Nye's will. He wondered if the skill had deemed the power itself as harmful and counteracted its effect. Nye said his ability wasn't related to power. She had been weakening herself. She wasn't affected by aging because she was an eternal being. Slad concluded that the aging effect of his fully automatic weakening didn't work on the demon lord. Nye said that he was right, and that this was the crux of it. Slad said that her skills must also work on the unique dream mansion. In other words, it also could influence the demon lord too. If he could destroy her, then he would be able to defeat the demon lord as well. Slad was wondering what Nye wanted him to do. Nye said she couldn't stop her own power. From now on, the dream mansion would appear somewhere in the world, luring many into dreams. Nye reached for the top button of her shirt and undid it. She revealed to him a necklace and asked him to touch it with all his strength. She questioned whether he could truly test if he was capable of bringing down her immortal self. As she revealed the pendant she wore, she urged him not to hesitate. Since the traveler could not appear in the hero child's dream, she wanted to reveal the only way to wake him. However, Slad interrupted her. He told her that if this is the only way, he would only carry regret. She held his face gently, asking him not to make that face, insisting that this was something truly wonderful. Slad angrily pushed her hands away, claiming this wasn't wonderful at all. Surprised by his reaction, Nye asked him not to be so angry, explaining that his words hurt her deeply, far more than heartbreaking. Slad asked her how a friend could possibly ask another to take a life. Nye was taken aback by the word friend. He told her plainly that they were indeed friends. After all, they'd known each other this well. That's exactly what they had become. He said the thought of ending the life of a child who reflected on their mistakes was unthinkable. It was something he simply couldn't do. Nye apologized deeply, acknowledging what she had done was something awful. Slad told her he had an idea he wanted to share. After explaining it, Nye asked if that was truly possible. Slad told her he believed she could make it happen. When she voiced her fears about what might go wrong, he reminded her that she had always believed in him the most. He had come to the dream world to reclaim his comrades, and for that reason, there was no way he would abandon her now. That's why he needed her, to turn his dream into reality. Because her true name was Dream Night Knowledge, Nightmare Fairy. There was no dream she couldn't transform into reality. Nye understood, and joy filled her expression. She declared that he was right. There truly was no single dream she couldn't realize. With confidence and resolve, Slad told her to believe in herself, to know that she could do it. Nye, filled with excitement, shouted that she believed in both herself and in him. Then, she asked him to state his wish aloud, promising to make it come true. Slad asked her to join him as his partner. Suddenly, Nye vanished. Slad called out to her, asking if she had succeeded. A strange sensation overwhelmed him, and he collapsed unconscious. He awoke the next morning to find himself lying on a bed in a sunlit room in the royal castle. To make sure it still wasn't a dream, he pinched himself. Nye appeared before him and asked how his awakening was treating him. Confused, Slad wondered aloud whether they were still in a dream, since he could still see her. Nye replied that this was no dream. This was reality. Slad was astonished. Nye explained that just as the traveler had said, everything had worked out perfectly. Slad admired that and smiled, saying that his skill, fully automatic support, had clearly affected Nye-chan. Nye admitted she had never thought such a thing could happen. Slad, on the other hand, had considered the possibility. If full automatic weakening worked, there was no reason for full automatic support not being able to. He said the plan now was to bring Nye-chan into the team. With the power of full automatic support, she would rise to a new level. But Nye objected loudly, saying that even if he had full automatic abilities, she still wanted him to be able to control it manually. She needed to find a way to make that work. Slad bowed his head and said he'd leave the second half entirely to Nye-chan. Then, he asked why he had fallen asleep. Nye apologized, saying that she had suddenly become too powerful and that she couldn't control it right away. Apparently, she had accidentally sent him into a deep slumber where dreams couldn't reach. Looking at her, Slad asked how she could appear like this in the real world as well. Nye said that she was just as surprised. It seemed like she gained the ability to transform from the mansion's form into the one he had envisioned. And that wasn't all. She could also ensure that he wouldn't forget this was a dream. She had truly become skilled at bending dreams to her will. That made Slad pause. If this really was reality, then why was he in the royal castle? Nye told him his friends had arrived just in time, and that he could ask them for the rest of the story. She added that she would take her time exploring the surroundings and asked him not to rush. Just as Slad had asked her to stay a little longer, she had suddenly disappeared. He hoped everything would be fine after powering up the one and only, but as he considered it, he wondered whether giving them freedom might not be such a good idea. At that moment, Etekica entered the room. Slad blushed, heart racing, confused about what he was feeling. Etekica rushed over to him and hugged him tightly, overwhelmed with joy. Slad declared that he was fully awake. Shisha then offered him an apple she had peeled herself. He thanked her, saying he would eat it later. Etekica was in tears, telling him how worried she had been. While Remeli tried to calm her down, Slad had asked her what had happened while he was asleep, and remarked that the place resembled a royal castle. He also asked about Aries. Shisha and Dishia exchanged a glance. Then, Dishia explained that countless events had unfolded during his sleep. First, she had urgent news to share. She presented a document and explained that the fully awakened Aries had returned to the capital and accused them, the brave party members who had departed, of betrayal. He had declared them traitors who defied the hero, under the charge of treason against the kingdom. Slad was surprised by the treason against the state, and considered it utterly ridiculous. He had just awoken from sleep that lasted more than a month. Now he was in the castle, where Dishia brought him breakfast and sat across from him. She told him that, during all the times she had sued him for saving her, she asked him to take his time listening and delving into the details, promising to explain what happened during his entire month of unconsciousness. Dishia began recounting the events. On a rainy day, while they were all inside the tent, Slad lay sleeping. Everyone was sad. Everyone, except Aries. Aries mocked him and told Remeli that Slad had been knocked out cold due to the little status effect. Remeli grew angry and was upset that Aries had awakened while Slad remained quiet. Aries kept mocking, wondering aloud how Slad could ever show his face again after he ran away. At that point, Dishia confronted him, stating that Slad had been exiled, not fled. Aries insisted it was just a lie, but the girls didn't believe him. They trusted Slad deeply. Shisha said that Slad had always shared his vast knowledge about monsters and explained their weaknesses to the group. Remeli mentioned how he had risked his life to save hers, and that she would not have survived if it wasn't for the potion he had given her. Still, Aries insisted that Slad had done nothing and was useless. He then tried to confuse Etekica, accusing Slad of manipulating her and attempting to convince her to join his team, presenting himself as the legendary hero Aries Sama. He was even supposedly including her in his circle of lovers due to her rank. Etekica gasped in anger, and crying bitterly declared that Aries was nothing but a pathetic soul who could ever only love himself, just as Slad had once said. Dishia continued the story, explaining how Aries would talk to the girls without even remembering their names, since he never considered them true companions, but merely pawns. To Aries, remembering names wasn't important at all. Etekica firmly told him that she would join Slad's team and fight alongside him against the Demon King instead of joining Aries. With that, all the girls became a part of Slad's team. Aries became furious once again and cast doubt on Slad's roughness, that it was something else. The girls were offended by his words. Remeli delivered a punch strong enough to knock him to the ground, while Shisha threatened him with her weapon and ordered him to stay silent, forbidding him to ever compare himself to someone like him. Dishia told Slad that it had been a super cool moment. Shisha blushed from the embarrassment. Dishia said that everyone agreed on that. When she turned, she noticed that Shisha had quietly slipped away. Dishia then continued her conversation to Slad. Even the mighty Aries had decided to chill for a little, so the group had opted to go on a little camping trip. Then came the million-dollar question. She asked Slad to guess what kind of trouble Aries had gotten himself into this time. She continued the story, while Aries lay on the ground after being struck. Dishia asked if he truly believed what he had said. Shisha added mockingly that he could be a lower body goof, and Remeli declared that it was time to chop up his manhood. Aries, confused and nervous, said that as long as he could keep his hero abilities, everything would be fine. Dishia told him that no one cared about his powers, and admitted that she had been thinking of waiting until Slad woke up. Then she punched Aries hard in the face and told him to brace himself. Aries panicked, fearing she might be serious. Dishia claimed she had no idea what he was talking about and said she might use him. Or she might not. Aries attempted to escape, but Dishia punched him again and told him not to give up, but instead to show some real courage, because there was still one more person he needed to take down. That was when Remeli stepped forward bravely and delivered a powerful blow that impressed all the girls. Dishia proudly announced that Remeli possessed a rare skill of super strength. Dishia began to recount how, on the next morning, Slad had still not awakened. Shisha then suggested that they head to the royal capital, since it was their original destination. There might be some way to awaken him there as well. Along the way, the companions encountered monsters affected by the miasma, though none of them fought back except for Aries. Dishia went on to explain that his skills must have been activating automatically during his sleep. She also shared how, that day, the group had taken a carriage that brought them to the castle, while she was still carrying the still sleeping Slad. Upon their arrival, Etekica expressed her worries about Slad, since it was likely that outsiders would not be allowed entry into the castle. Aries laughed with his sinister laugh, prompting Dishia to ask him why. He declared that from now on, he would be a hero, that he would meet the king, and he told his companions that they would regret their decision. Deeply regret leaving his party. It was then that Slad came to understand why they had been accused of treason. Dishia asked if he ever casually mentioned that he had been asleep for an entire month. Slad put two and two together and began shouting that maybe this was the reason why he felt so tensed up. Dishia admitted she had never imagined the king would listen to Aries and actually hold a trial. She began to ponder about what the former SS-ranked adventurer Cassius Saywood Belcraft would do. Of course, without his bravery and cunning, humanity might have been wiped out by the Demon King. She added that it had been the king's idea to form a hero party under the pretense of defeating the Demon King. This was precisely why the decision was so difficult to understand. Furthermore, she said that she didn't think that Aries' claims would hold up, but the trial was set to begin in 3 days. Now that Slad had awakened, he would be required to testify. Etekica said that she didn't really understand human politics, but hoped that things would turn out well. Then she remembered the death penalty, and her mood darkened. Dishia declared her allegiance to the hero party, but vowed to protect everyone properly and planned to expose Aries' tyranny. Remeli questioned whether that would be acceptable. If they did that, Aries might no longer be able to play the role of the hero anymore. Dishia acknowledged that this was right, but Slad asserted that it wasn't like that. If Aries couldn't act like a hero, then there was nothing to worry about. In fact, they might be the ones in a dire position, actually. Etekica asked him to explain further. Slad said that Dishia and Remeli might already have a sense of it. After all, fighting in a tavern and stealing from a noble's mansion were punishable crimes. But the rest of them had faced no consequences for their actions simply because Aries was a hero. Remeli mentioned how he had been restrained by guards on multiple occasions. Slad said that was exactly it. Aries had never actually been thrown in jail, nor had they been sent to the mines. The hero got a free pass. Aries might be foolish, but he was clever when it came to self-preservation. He must understand his position well, and requested that for his audience. Slad was beginning to think that what remained unclear was the king's true intentions. If this was only about fulfilling Aries' wishes, then it would have been easier to simply throw them in prison. But clearly, they were being kept in the guest room, which didn't seem like the treatment for someone about to be judged. Still, that didn't mean Slad couldn't see any benefit in hanging Aries out to dry. Remeli clung to Etekica and began to cry. Slad looked at them and wondered why Etekica was even in the royal castle. They had been summoned for the trial, and since Etekica wasn't involved in the hero party's mess, there was no reason for her to remain there. Etekica explained that when the soldier came, she was asked to accompany them because she was Slad's companion. Slad asked if Remeli had been with her, and Remeli answered that she had. She had simply been out shopping. That's when Slad realized that Etekica had been summoned to testify. Etekica added, speaking of which, she thought she was told to answer questions during the trial. Dishia rushed towards Etekica, pointing out that she was a witness, and therefore she shouldn't be present there with them. If they were accused of collusion, they could lose their ability to testify altogether. Remeli pulled Etekica aside, saying the soldier hadn't stopped her. Slad began to think. If they weren't supposed to have contact with each other, they should have been placed under house arrest, especially if they were going to conduct a proper trial. The day of the trial had arrived, and it seemed that, maybe this time, there would be no hero exception. Everyone had been summoned to the court and taken their places in the hall. King Cashew announced the beginning of the hero's trial, calling in the plaintiff, the brave hero Aries, to step forward. Aries stepped forward quickly. The king said that according to his claims, the party's witch and the rogue and pack mule had shamelessly betrayed him, and that he suffered great losses because of it. Aries said there was no doubt that they had done so, but the king interrupted him before he could say everything and asked him to step back. Aries tried to ask the king to let him finish his words, but the king firmly told him to step back and asked the holy maiden Dishia to come forward. He said she was the only remaining member of the hero party, but she agreed with the hero's claims. Dishia denied that, saying what the hero was claiming was complete nonsense. Aries became extremely angry with her and said not to mess with him, then tried to stand up. The guards stopped him and surrounded him. The king ordered the court magician to place Aries under forced silence and said that no one but witnesses were allowed to speak freely, and that if he did the same thing when the magic wears off, he would be ordered to leave immediately. Aries was unable to speak due to the magic. The king said to Dishia that the hero claimed her statements were nonsense and that the three members had already left, and asked her to clarify the matter. Dishia lowered her head to the king, requesting his permission to proceed step by step. Then she began to speak, and said that the baggage carrier Slad Meist was dismissed without permission. At that moment, Slad was thinking to himself that it was fortunate Dishia was skilled, as she explained things very cleverly while hiding his abilities. Dishia continued speaking to the king, saying that, above all, the hero had tried to abandon the witch to a wyvern. She said the witch Remeli also left because she couldn't keep up with the hero. The king listened to her and said he understood. then asked Slad Maced if he had anything to add. Slad was surprised and said he had nothing in particular to add, then sighed in relief and thought to himself that he was surprised because it came out of nowhere. At that time, Aries was very upset and angry about what was happening in the court, but he couldn't speak as he was still under the influence of the magic. The king said that if the Holy Maiden's testimony matched that of the defendant, it would be considered an internal conflict due to differences in opinion, and he believed it was not something he should intervene with. Therefore, the defendant was not guilty. The friends were happy about that, while Aries was upset. The companions relaxed a little and said that the matter was much easier than expected. At that moment, the king informed them that the trial would continue, and now he would question the validity of the hero's qualifications. Slad was surprised, and he said he knew the king's reason for holding the trial lie elsewhere. The guards brought a large number of documents and placed them in front of the king. He said he had received petitions regarding the hero Aries, and that these were only the ones he acknowledged. As for the ones disputed or denied, they were excluded. Shisha was disappointed, because the trial was not yet over, and this was not everything. Slad, during all of this, remained silent, looking at Aries, realizing it was time for him to face his sins that he must confront now. The trial was still ongoing. After the king declared that there were doubts about the hero Aries' strength, it was Shisha's turn to be interrogated. She stepped forward, trembling with fear after hearing the king's question. He wanted to confirm whether her rare skill, her extraordinary memory, was genuine. Shisha affirmed that this was true, which surprised Slad. She had always avoided talking about her skills. The king reminded everyone that the hero was the only exception, and that he would overlook certain things, but he still intended to test Aries to see if he truly deserved the title of hero. Shisha told him she had heard everything with her own ears. She added that Aries ignored situations like everyone else, but took advantage of his position as a hero, acted recklessly, and regretted it. Among his actions, his sins were not those that could be forgiven. The king asked if she had witnessed Aries' actions herself, and then demanded she reveal the truth. Shisha was shocked by his request, but agreed. Slad was astonished by her skills, which he had been unaware of. Shisha then began to subject herself to the truth reveal skill, following the king's orders. He told her that she would later assist them in documenting Aries' crimes in a private chamber. Slad, though, was confused about why the king wanted her to reveal the truth right then and there. The king then called Shisha with a serious tone and asked her to answer without deception. He asked if super memory was really her own skill. Shisha began to tremble, overwhelmed with anxiety. After thinking for a long time, she answered that it wasn't her original skill. Slad froze in place upon hearing this. Shisha then said that in her country, such a thing wasn't punishable. The king asked her how she obtained it and whether she acquired it over time. Shisha was in a tough position, but she was under the obligation to tell the truth. She revealed that she had taken the skill from someone else. She had stolen it, using her unique ability, Talent Thief. Her teammates were shocked to hear this for the first time. Confusion spread throughout the courtroom. The king raised his hand to signal for silence. Slad was impressed by the king's authority and began to understand his plan. The king thanked Shisha for her honesty and told her that that was his final question. He then asked if she could take Aries' skill from him and whether she could transfer it to someone else. Shisha became emotional, raising her voice as she tried to explain her ability, but the king cut her off and asked her to answer simply, yes or no. She responded calmly that yes, she could take the hero's ability. The king then announced that his inquiries were finished and apologized for bringing up potentially painful memories. At that moment, Aries suddenly shouted, asking to be given a chance to explain. The silence spell cast on him had ended, but his demeanor hadn't changed. He remained as loud and as brash as before. Though Aries had been protected by the status of hero, it turned out that not only could that title be revoked, it could also be transferred to someone else. This destroyed his last source of support. The king's tone shifted to a more serious one, and with sharp eyes, he warned Aries that under normal circumstances, he would have been asked to leave already. Aries lost control, screaming in the courtroom, promising to change and begging the king not to take the hero skill from him. He wept and pleaded for another chance. The king told him he believed people deserved up to 3 chances. Aries didn't understand what he meant. The king asked if Aries saw only 3 sheets of paper before him, and told him that with all these stacks of paper, he had gone too far. Even though he had been given the best environment and the best for his allies, he'd wasted the greatest opportunity like garbage. Aries kept begging for forgiveness, but the king stood by his decision and told him it was too late. He would not be forgiven. Aries collapsed to the ground, crying, as 2 guards picked him up and told him he would receive further judgment and should count the days he had left in his dungeon. Aries began to scream at the king, shouting that he had fought for the world and blaming him for repaying him in this way. As he was dragged away, he screamed in fury. The king realized that things were getting out of hand and decided to issue a 3-hour lunch break, thus ending Aries' fall, something Etekica found almost underwhelming. Though she hadn't felt she had done anything at all, Remeli approached Shisha, teasing her, saying that she seemed a bit wicked and should have used her skill in Aries earlier. Though Shisha stood up and apologized, saying she needed to go out for a bit. After she left, Remeli felt guilty and asked the others if what she had said was something wrong. Slad explained that talking about unique skills was a sensitive matter, especially for Shisha, who had always avoided the subject. He reminded them that she was the most sensitive when it came to skills, having always refused to talk about hers in the past. Remeli realized she would have to apologize to her later. But Slad wasn't so sure there would be a later. He stood up. He said he would go look for her. Dishia told him that was reckless. Etekica told him he wouldn't be able to catch up to a thief class member. Slad knew that, but he couldn't just sit and leave her alone. So he asked them to wait for him as he left to find her. Soon, he began to hear the sound of Naichan's flute, which guided him until he reached a sealed door. He opened it without hesitation and found Shisha on the ground near her bag. He stood there in shock, unable to believe she was really leaving them. Naichan then urged him to pick her up before she was lost forever. Slad didn't understand what Nai meant, but suddenly, he woke up in a strange place, realizing he was inside Shisha's dream. While he was lost in thought, he heard her voice beside him. He asked her, surprised, what she was doing in a place like this. She told him she was about to ask him the same question, saying she had just found herself here. When he asked her where the others were, she replied sadly that she had shattered that happiness. But she was still grateful. Shisha asked Slad if she had truly destroyed happiness, then looked at him and asked if she could confess something to him. She told him that she used to be a well-known adventurer, known as the Skill Thief from the Old Continent. As her title implies, she was a stealer of skills. She confessed that she used to steal skills from evildoers and use their powers to help others. She admitted that she was nothing more than a hypocrite. Even back then, she never thought about how those villains also had families. She was destroying families and leaving children orphaned. She said she could never forget one particular scene. The man from whom she had stolen the super memory skill. Slad could hear the sorrow in her voice. She told him she never thought that the man would take his own life. She broke down in tears, telling him she only meant to punish the arrogant villain, and that she had also planned to return the skill once he started to reflect, but she realized too late, after his death, that a skill is a part of a person. It cannot be separated without deep consequences. She discovered then how cruel it was to take someone's skill, and swore never to use the skill thief ability again. Slad realized the king must have known Shisha couldn't use skill thief anymore, yet he still interrogated her. likely to make Aries feel like his position as a hero was no longer secure. Shisha continued, explaining that she kept sending money to that man's family and never abandoned them. Unfortunately, the mother didn't survive. But the children managed to grow up well enough that they were able to live with another family. Shisha knew Slad understood her. Slad felt pity for her and her shattered past, which was now over. She told him she knew she was selfish, but that didn't matter. She couldn't steal Aries' skill. Slad said the king didn't think that way, and Shisha replied that she knew he only wanted to reveal the existence of Skill Thief. Then Slad asked her why she wanted to disappear from the group. She told him she didn't want anyone to know about the Skill Thief at all. She apologized for hiding the truth about herself. Slad understood her feelings and told her that Remeli wanted to apologize to her. She said that he could tell Remeli that it was fine, but he asked her to tell her in person. Shisha refused and said she wouldn't forgive her. Slad respected her desire not to use her skill again, but told her that disappearing like this was wrong. Still, he wouldn't force her to stay. He said he wouldn't forgive her if she ran away without listening to Remeli's apology, that he wouldn't forgive her. Shisha told him he'd picked the worst time for this. But Slad continued, explaining that running from the family wasn't the right choice. She should have apologized to them directly, but Shisha believed she didn't deserve forgiveness. He asked her if she wanted to be forgiven, or to be punished. Was it really so easy to want to help a family from a distance without saying a word? Shisha became emotional, crying as she shouted that she would keep running and always choose the easier path alone. Tears poured from her as her heart shattered. Slad quietly approached her and embraced her, telling her she had done well today. She didn't understand what he meant, so he explained that she was the one who stayed calm when Remeli was about to die because of his plan. She had calmly told him that they had found Remeli's hat, even though he blamed himself more than anyone. Yet she was the one who was trying to run away. Then he raised her head gently and patted. She told him that she wasn't just running away. Slad told her the past is over and couldn't be changed, but she could still change the present. Shisha stepped away from him, wiping her tears, then turned back and told him that he always spoke as if he always knew everything. But she admitted he was right. What he said was the truth. He told her it was simple. All she had to do was apologize for trying to leave without saying a word. Shisha finally agreed with what Slad had said and woke from her dream. Remeli was overjoyed to see her again and told her it was awful. She wouldn't have recovered if Shisha had truly left. Shisha apologized to them. Remeli jumped and hugged her, begging for forgiveness for saying something insensitive. Shisha felt suffocated by Remeli's tight hug, while Slad stood nearby, satisfied with what was happening. Etekica, meanwhile, was crying and said she didn't mean to ruin the mood. She was just grateful that Shisha was back, safe. As the group enjoyed their reunion, a girl approached and interrupted them, informing them that she had received a notice about the afternoon trial. She apologized for the interruption. After everyone gave their testimonies and everything went smoothly, Slad remained tense and upset by the misunderstanding that had occurred. As he walked, a soldier stopped him, telling him he had to accompany them by royal order. Etekica grew worried, thinking there might be another problem. Slad, exhausted, knew he wouldn't be able to rest just yet. They arrived at a place where Dishia and the king were talking. When they called out to Dishia, she was surprised to see her teammates. She asked the king if it was allowed for so many heroes to be here without the guards. The king told them not to worry. Even if they all attacked him, they still wouldn't stand a chance. Then they felt a strange sensation. Slad asked about the ability the king had discussed with everyone, except Aries. The king grabbed Slad and said in a strange tone that made everyone freeze. He asked a rhetorical question. asking if Slad really was dangerous. Actually, Cashew grew quite friendly and held a banquet in honor of Slad and his companions. During the evening, the king spoke with them informally and even joked around with Slad, which delighted Etekica, as it allowed her to converse more normally. This was especially helpful for her, given how difficult the common language was. In contrast, Shisha did not appreciate the lack of formality, and Remeli found it quite surprising that the king had suddenly become so friendly. Dishia, on the other hand, questioned whether such casual behavior was truly appropriate. Interestingly, the king wondered himself if the saint had always behaved this way. Slad explained that Dishia tended to be very serious. At that moment, the king remarked there was no need to stand on ceremony with an old friend. Slad then revealed that he and Cashew had once been in the same party a long time ago. The girls were stunned by this revelation. Cashew burst out into a hearty laughter and described himself as simply a former adventurer who had become a king. He encouraged them to eat as a senior, or he wouldn't be able to enjoy his drink. Dishia seemed to be on the verge of saying something, but Remeli interrupted, assuring everyone that it was fine. If the king said so, then it must be acceptable. She then walked over to the dining table, removed the cover from a dish, and began eating alongside Etekica. The two of them found the food incredibly delicious. Dishia panicked at their actions, warning them not to begin eating without permission. Meanwhile, the king was overjoyed and eagerly declared that the celebration had officially begun, calling it a royal decree. Dishia and Shisha watched in surprise, still hesitant to join in the festivities. The atmosphere took a more serious turn when King Cashew expressed regret for dragging them all into the trial, explaining that there had been various circumstances involved. Slad requested a clear explanation, as they still couldn't fully grasp the situation. With a loud laugh, the king promised to explain everything, and he began by asking their opinion of Aries. Remeli bluntly stated that he was the worst. Dishia called him a hopeless scumbag, while Etekica admitted she couldn't believe he was considered a hero. Cashew confirmed that this was the main reason for the trial. He revealed that Aries had a notorious reputation for bullying since childhood. When he turned 15 and was evaluated for his skills, he was found to have the hero's qualities, an outcome that felt unbelievable. It was as though the worst possible hero had been born. Despite this, the fact that he qualified as a hero could not be denied, especially since previous heroes had always succeeded in defeating any demon lord that appeared before. A long time had passed, so Cashew couldn't be sure whether the temple's propaganda had spread the legend far and wide. However, nobles from the old continent had spoken openly about it amongst their comrades who had fought through hell together, expressing sentiments like, "Heroes are scum, so let's give up on defeating the demon lord and keep burning the undead family." Though Cashew could never say it aloud, he couldn't help but express it. Regardless of his personal feelings, he had no choice but to allow Aries to become the hero. Slad understood, realizing that this was the reason they had all been gathered. Cashew confirmed that if Aries was going to take on the role, then he intended to do everything his way. He had mentioned that during the trial, Aries believed he'd gathered the best members. At first, everything went well, but as results began to pile up, Aries gained confidence in a bad way, and eventually became convinced that he was the strongest hero. Cashew went on to say that none of them seemed to realize that Aries' strength was largely due in part thanks to Slad. He even told Slad that including him in the party may have been a mistake. Remeli quickly objected, saying that wasn't true. Dishia added that without Slad, the hero's party would have collapsed much earlier. Shisha admitted that she would have abandoned the group immediately if not for him. Cashew chuckled and remarked that Slad was still a chick magnet. Slad modestly replied that he didn't think that was the sort of affection the king imagined. At that moment, Etekica suddenly shouted that as long as Slad was okay, she was too. Cashew laughed heartily, convinced even more that his suspicions about Slad and Etekica. Amidst the laughter and cheer, the mood shifted again as the king spoke more solemnly. He revealed that Aries had declared that he would not cooperate with the guy. As a compromise, Slad had been made the baggage carrier, while the rest of the team was composed entirely of women. Remeli, with shining eyes, raised her hand and said that she had volunteered for it. Cashew told her that she had been ideal, motivated, and highly skilled. Remeli was caught off guard and looked at him with confusion. The king then explained that although he had no need to gather women for the party, he had ensured that they were not the type that Aries could manipulate. Dishia, still surprised, asked whether that included her too, even though she was the saint. Cashew confirmed that that was part of it, but also noted that the temple had made a strong request for her to be selected, and so she had been chosen first. Dishia fell silent, deep in thought, while Shisha erupted in anger, claiming that the only reason she had been called to the party was because she was a little person, who made her an unacceptable target for Aries. The king laughed once more, remarking that Aries had never shown any interest in people like her. Slad, meanwhile, quietly reflected that perhaps they had been counting on a talent thief all along, and in truth, that insurance had worked. The king continued, explaining that for this reason, he had hoped to count on Shisha's exploits. Still, petitions and petitions continued to mount. From there, as they all knew the rest. With Slad, the central pillar of the party, cast out, Aries faced instant doom. The end had come too easily. At that point, the king paused, stood up, and poured himself another drink. He asked whether anyone truly believed that Aries could defeat a unique demon lord. From his perspective, it had always seemed far too difficult. Returning to his seat, Cashew spoke plainly. This idea of defeating the demon lord of the hero had already been tested, and it failed. At first, the temple's hero faction had been so lively, but Aries had caused too many problems, and the supporting royalty from the old continent became furious after Aries ruined their reputations. Cashew added that the bigwigs who read the report based on the petitions, he added that they were hoping to adopt the alternative plan he had proposed and punished Aries. Dishia slammed her hands on the table and stood up, demanding to know what this alternative plan was. The king answered, for humanity to coexist with the demon lord, and to aim for peace, so that the surface world might survive. Both Dishia and Remeli were stunned. They insisted that such a thing was impossible and unacceptable. Cashew, however, insisted that this was the reality. There was no guarantee that the sacred sword could defeat this demon lord. The temple merely asserted that all unique demon lords in the past had been defeated by the sacred sword. But this demon lord was launching a multi-front war, commanding an army of monsters. In such a scenario, defeating the demon lord wasn't essential. What was needed was to win the war and negotiate peace. That, he said, was the true goal. He told them bluntly, the idea of a hero party that would defeat the demon lord and bring peace was just an end in a fairy tale. Dishia muttered that it had been probably impossible from the very beginning. She then asked why, if he truly believed that. Had he formed a heroes party at all? She acknowledged that perhaps they had no choice but to let Aries take the role. But if he had known from the start that it was hopeless, what was the point of their struggle? She cried out in frustration, insisting that regardless of public opinion or the temple's claims, whether or not Aries was a hero, it should have been simply left alone. King Cashew answered her with confidence. When he discovered that Slad was present on this continent, he began to wonder. Perhaps Slad could defeat the demon lord. 10 years ago, Slad had defeated a unique monster, the fourth pillar, the Dragon Empress. Dishia and Remeli had never heard of this before. Etekica, however, recalled that he had mentioned it during the Nightmare Fairy incident. Remeli commented that their party had been struggling at that time, and had felt close to death more than once. Slad simply said that despite that, they had won, and that he had been there with them. This, the king declared, was exactly why his expectations for Slad had risen so high. He believed that Aries was under the illusion of his own strength, but wondered if that illusion could be pushed far enough to defeat a demon lord. With a mixture of anger and sorrow, the king slammed his hands on the table and stood up, and said to think that they would fire Slad. In the end, everyone else had been dragged to clean up their mess. With genuine regret, he apologized. Everyone turned to look at him. Slad told him there was no need to apologize. Cashew had his own reasons, and had done what he needed to do. More importantly, Slad said, had it not been for Cashew, he would have never met all of his friends. The king apologized again, saying he had felt powerless to do anything else. But now, with this incident, the groundwork was finally complete. The temple and the old royal families could now formally strip Aries of his status as a hero. He would have to atone for his past sins. Cashew added that he intended to make a public declaration regarding the extraction and securing of the hero's qualifications, though in truth, there was no real need for it. He then turned to Shisha and offered a special apology to her. Shisha stood, walked toward the window, and said she also needed to move forward. Yet she admitted that she couldn't completely accept his proposal of peace. She spoke of someone she had once seen, a person who turned legends into reality, someone who made fairy tales come true. Maybe it wasn't just a dream. Maybe one more time, she said. She wanted to use that power. She concluded by saying that she would take the title of hero from Aries. Everyone was left staring at her in silence. Slad stood on the palace balcony, where an Etekica found him. She walked towards him, holding a glass of a drink. He asked her if she was all right and whether the drink was too strong. She told him she could handle it, and said that it was the best choice. Slad replied that he wasn't sure if it was good for him, but at least it couldn't be denied that Aries had done things that made people believe this was fine. Earlier, Slad had pushed Cashew away strongly. He read the petition and learned about the countless innocent people who had been harmed by Aries, hidden from the eyes of the public. Yet Aries had never once apologized to the victims or their families. Still, the world was forced to tolerate him, just because he was a hero. That was the only reason he hadn't been sent to prison or to the mines. In truth, Aries treated women like mere tools to satisfy his desires and didn't care about their lives. He was no longer a hero. Etekica then asked if Slad really paid attention to Aries. She paused, as something in her thoughts made her feel sad. Slad confessed he had never really been able to forgive Aries, not even once. He had never seen him apologize. Aries would always blame someone else for his failures and speak ill of others. Slad thanked Etekica and declared that he has made his decision. Curious, she asked what that decision was. Slad revealed he wouldn't be returning home. From now on, he would keep adventuring as an adventurer. He reached out his hand and asked if she would stay with him from now on. Etekica was surprised by his request. She began to reflect. Before meeting Slad, she had known nothing from the outside world. She had been adventuring with Slad for not very long, but he had already taught her so much. There was still so much she didn't know, and learning had become exciting for her. She smiled, reached out her hand to shake his, and she said she looked forward to more adventures with him. That night, while Slad was asleep, Dishia knocked on his door and asked if she could speak with him for a second. Slad, surprised by her late-night visit, opened the door. Dishia, clearly distressed, asked if it was okay to come in. He had no objection and invited her in, offering her a cup of tea and placing another in front of himself. A quiet moment passed between the two, before Dishia leaned over the table and said she was truly sorry. Slad was taken aback and asked if something had happened suddenly. With her head still bowed, Dishia admitted she had been wrong to think she could control that man. Then, lifting her head, she acknowledged that her arrogance at the temple was all for nothing. She asked Slad if he had read Aries' record. According to her, someone like Aries didn't deserve to be alive. She should have killed him with her own hands. Considering the growing number of his victims, she said she might have been able to reduce the amount of victims. Dishia's voice trembled as tears filled her eyes. Slad confessed he had never thought he could do something so horrible. Even Shisha couldn't comprehend it. He added that Dishia couldn't possibly understand either. Overwhelmed, Dishia covered her face and broke down, saying that perhaps she was the only one who had noticed. It was the temple that proclaimed the hero exemption. Despite everything, the temple that spread the hero legend could not deny Aries' heroic qualities. After all, skills were considered divine gifts. And if the hero were evil, it would mean the good Lord had made a mistake. Indeed, the temple had been desperate to recreate past hero legends, since the appearance of a new demon lord. More accurately, it was the hero faction that did it. Dishia continued, expressing her certainty that Aries' misdeeds had been deliberately covered up. It must be the work of the skills. She suggested the temple's skill might not have it even begun to reach their full potential yet. Slad clenched his teeth, a spark of excitement igniting within him. The mention of skills triggered a realization after Dishia said there was an organization that would stop at nothing to prove the glory of the Lord. Dishia said that, in hindsight, everything made sense. It was no wonder they couldn't see Aries' wrongdoings. She had relied endlessly on members of the organization, and although she had been in a position to touch the temple's core, she had failed to notice these movements happening beneath the surface. Slad told her that his desire to lead the hero and defeat the demon lord had blinded him. Aries' actions weren't solely Dishia's responsibility. He was guilty too. As a party member, he spoke only the bare minimum to Aries. He had given up on communicating with him too early. That wasn't all. He could have asked Shisha to keep an eye on him. Remeli too. He had despaired over Aries, but she had shut her eyes and ears for their own goals. Shisha couldn't even take away Aries' skill, weighed down by the guilt of her past. In the end, they were all guilty, all complicit. Dishia was surprised by his words. Slad admitted that no matter how many words he gathered, he didn't think he could heal her regret. But he promised to be her eternal ally. He asked her to let him support her when things got difficult. That, he said, was his original skill. That was what he was always meant to be. Dishia stopped crying. She vowed to reform the temple and asked Slad for a chance. She didn't want to be the kind of person who would make him give up on her. Slad was surprised, but reassured her that he had never once thought about abandoning her. He smiled, his eyes lighting up with a realization. Dishia had always tried her best. She could be rigid and one-track minded, but once she made a decision, she wouldn't back down. She constantly threatened to hit him, yet had never actually done so. Rather, he never seriously suffered a hit. Dishia smiled back, saying that what he taught her in her dreams had been finally found. This, she declared, was her true desire. The path she had chosen. Slad returned the smile and said he could clearly see it. Aries had left deep scars on this world. During the hero trial, Slad and his companions were declared not responsible. Yet they still carried the weight of Aries' sins, facing their weaknesses and continuing to live on. That would surely be where the next adventure begins. Slad was at the market, weaving through the crowd as he searched for the remaining ingredients for the slime jam apple pie. Suddenly, he noticed a group of people gathered around a cart guarded by soldiers. One of the bystanders mentioned hearing that he was found guilty during the hero trial and was currently being transported. Then, Slad heard a familiar voice shouting. It was Aries, yelling that this was absolutely wrong and that something like this couldn't possibly be happening to him. Aries was shackled, and when he saw Slad in the crowd, he demanded that he stop staring. In a sudden burst of rage, Aries broke free from his restraints, escaping the guards, and charged straight towards Slad. With fury in his voice, he screamed that it had all been Slad's fault, completely his fault, as he tried to attack. Aries attacked Slad, shouting that he was the one to blame. Aries was furious, claiming they were all terrible as he struck Slad with a powerful blow, saying they had betrayed him. Though Slad stood calmly, holding a bag of apples, when one suddenly fell to the ground. He was thinking about the conversation he had with Etekica on the balcony. He had said those things, but in truth, he had been watching Aries closely, realizing how much he meant to him. It became clear to him that he had no choice. They were still comrades. Aries clutched his hand in pain and collapsed to the ground, while Slad thought it looked strange that the fully automated support was still activated. Slad then sat down, looked at Aries, and said that it was definitely time for farewell. He stood up and walked away, as Aries looked at him with a desperate, frustrated gaze. Aries became angry once again, when he was surrounded by the guards who were worried he might hurt the civilians. They rushed to capture him. The guards were displeased with him for getting in their way and made sure to corner him tightly so he wouldn't escape again. Slad left the scene, thinking that Aries' target had changed and that fully automated weakening had run its course. In Aries' mind, Slad had already left him behind, and his reckless attacks showed that, rather than a hero. Slad returned to the capital. When he entered the room, he found the girls had prepared a spread of delicious dishes and were sitting, waiting for him. Etekica welcomed him warmly. Remeli asked him what happened in the square, as it had been so noisy. Shisha said she had been waiting forever, and Dishia said that he wanted the apple pie, so they had prepared it for everyone. Etekica hugged him, and said they had finally gathered after 2 weeks apart, and told everyone to eat quickly. Dishia added that they should start eating now and save their complaints for the drinking table. The friends gathered around the table, sharing food and stories. Dishia had recently returned to the temple and seemed to be training with the monks. The priest said the Saint Test shouldn't do that, but she clearly did whatever it was she pleased. Remeli had been invited to the royal castle and was happily learning how to fight discrimination against half-demons while making potions for those on the front lines. She had become a close friend to Etekica, and they often went shopping together. Shisha pretended to be a spy hired by Cashew. It seemed they weren't charging for the thief incident, but instead, she was offering various favors to Cashew. She's the type who never goes down without a fight. As for Nai-chan, she flew around the capital, showing kids wonderful dreams. At night, she appeared in Slad's dreams, saying she had decided to make his dream her new home. Meanwhile, the former hero Aries was in deep trouble due to the number of death sentences piling up against him, especially for his involvement with a noble lady. He no longer had any heroic qualities. In fact, she had already been taken by Shisha, and now his fate rested in Dishia's hands. The hero party has finally been disbanded. The reasons that once brought Shisha, Remeli, and Dishia together for adventure had all disappeared. On a beautiful sunny day in the high mountains, Slad and Etekica went out to gather herbs. Etekica approached him and wondered if they had gathered enough for the request collection. Slad suddenly looked worried and started acting strange, though Etekica couldn't understand why he was behaving this way. On their way back, they were surprised to see that the sky above the capital looked strange. Etekica climbed a tall rock to get a better view of what was happening. The capital was surrounded by a massive horde of zombies and skeletons. They were using each other to climb the walls, while the guards struggled to keep them at bay. Slad thought about the capital's temple barrier that should prevent these monsters from entering, and wondered what was happening. Etekica said they needed to head towards the capital right away, but Slad asked her to wait a moment. He began thinking. Zombies and skeletons were weak individually, but numbers were overwhelming. They weren't in the hundreds or thousands. These were in the tens of thousands. He wondered how Cashew had allowed such a massive approach of the undead to go unnoticed. At that moment, a necromancer commander of the Demon Lord's army, Zel Harney, appeared, carrying a book and riding a skeletal dragon. He encountered both Slad and Etekica in the forest. Slad saw him as a serious threat, realizing that the barrier only repelled regular undead. But if a necromancer was involved, everything changed. A necromancer from a forbidden class. If they were under his control, they could break the barrier. And if they were summoned nearby, there would be no way to notice it in time. But more than anything, a necromancer capable of controlling such a massive number of the undead, that was a true level of power of the commander of the Demon Lord's army. Etekica asked him what he meant by this, while Slad stood in front of her, wrapping an arm around her protectively, as Zel Harney answered that he had come to save them. He asked if they were really saying that humans planned to execute him, the hero. He said the Demon Lord was deeply impressed by the hero, as he was self-centered and had such a dark soul that even demons were horrified of him. Above all, he had incredible combat power. He said keeping someone like that as a hero was a waste. and that Aries was far more suited for a position in the Demon Lord's army. At that moment, Slad thought to himself that everything Zel Harney said was true. Aries truly was the kind of villain who could have become a high-ranking member of the Demon Lord's army, if he wasn't a hero. Zel Harney basically said it was a recruitment offer, then added that they were free to run, but only if they could get away. Suddenly, a horde of zombies and skeletons surged towards them. Slad felt the danger. Fighting against that many enemies was incredibly bad. With such numbers, he couldn't control the hate with taunt. While he could manage the fully automated weakening, he had Etekica there with him, and Zel Harney was far too away to reach the stone. If this continued, Etekica would be wiped out. He then told Etekica to run without him, but Etekica, calmed and composed, declared that she was ready to face this fight. She said that Aries had done many terrible things, and now it was time for her to atone for her sins. Etekica summoned the flying spirit with all her might, and Slad was astonished by the power she displayed. He asked what was happening. Etekica explained that she had asked her friends to blow away some of the undead. Slad was surprised by her spirit, Sylph, and asked when she had become this strong. She told him it had been a month since she went on an adventure with others while he was asleep, and that she too had grown since then. More importantly, she needed Slad to light the torch. Slad was confused, but Etekica urged him to hurry. He then said he was glad he brought the magical flint with him, and asked if that would do. Etekica replied that that was more than enough. Zel Harney mocked her, saying she did well and he was impressed with it. But it didn't mean anything. He revealed a flint shaped like a spine, and said that his skills came from the King of the Undead. Slad had never heard of the King of the Undead before. Zel Harney continued, saying that just as Slad had guessed, it was a unique skill. Thanks to this power, he could summon and control far more undead than a regular necromancer. Opening his book, he remarked that each undead was weak individually, which was a downside. But then he closed the book, and said that if that were the case, they should take a look at his undead golem. Millions of undead gathered together, forming a giant undead. Zel Harney declared that the giant body could not be blown away by the wind, and ordered it to crush and flatten them. Etekica gathered her strength, and launched a fireball at the giant, successfully knocking it down. Slad was amazed, and asked if that was the fire spirit Salamander. She replied that she had summoned a different spirit, but Sylph hadn't disappeared. Etekica said that this was multiple summons, a skill she just learned too. Still, she added, the undead golem was now nothing but ash. Zel Harney smiled and let out a wicked laugh, admitting that yes, the undead were weak to fire, but it was useless, as long as he possessed the King of the Undead skill. He commanded the undead golem to rise once more. And it did. Both Slad and Etekica were shocked. Zel Harney explained that, as they could see, the King of the Undead could command an infinite army of undead, and could revive itself over and over again. Slad was stunned. If reviving as many times as needed was real, then this was absolutely insane. At that moment, the flying spirit, Sylph, declared that she would burn them all until they were crispy, and launched another fireball at the giant. She accomplished this feat with the salamander by her side, but once again, the undead golem rose. Zel Harney laughed maniacally, calling their efforts useless. Etekica then decided to target the one using her skill directly. She took a bow and arrow and aimed it directly at Zel Harney, but he dodged it instantly, saying that that could have been dangerous, adding that he was glad he placed an arrow dodge blessing on himself. Slad was surprised. The arrow dodge blessing deflects physical shots with magic. If Remeli could infuse arrows with magic, physical attacks could be repelled. Etekica asked Slad if he couldn't inflict a debuff on him. Slad replied that that would be difficult, especially since Zel Harney hadn't directly commanded the undead golem to attack them. The undead instinctively hate the living and attack on their own. Slad thought he might succeed if he stepped forward, but that wouldn't matter against an undead target. Even if he beat it, another undead would just be summoned. It wouldn't change anything. Etekica wondered if that was so. Then maybe it was up to her to stop him. Slad regretted that he couldn't use his debuffs as his own will. They only activated automatically. Etekica held his face in her hands, looked at him, and said he didn't need to apologize. All she needed was for him to hold on a little longer. Slad was taken aback and asked what she meant by that. Etekica launched another fiery attack at Zel Harney, using the spirit's sylph and salamander. But she felt drained and exhausted. Zel Harney, on the other side, didn't break a sweat. Slad wondered if it was because he wasn't consuming mana at all, or if it was due to the king of the undead. Not only was he reviving the undead golem, but he was also summoning new zombies to replenish its lost flesh and bones. And looked like he was creating an infinite army. Slad thought that if that were truly the case, if the king of the undead could create an infinite number of undead, then Zel Harney wouldn't really be able to do what he could have done. Suddenly, Etekica collapsed to the ground, saying she was sorry. She could no longer clearly hear the spirit's voice. Slad caught her in his arms, telling her that wasn't true, that she was truly amazing. But Etekica said she was just a newbie, just a spirit user. She added that those kids were there because of him, and that this was her first time fighting such an incredible foes from the Demon Lord's army. She took his hand and said that Slad's companions were amazing because Slad was amazing, so he should be proud of his strength. She had fulfilled her duty, and now she just needed a little more. If Slad gave it his best, then she lost consciousness. Slad held her in his arms. At that moment, Zel Harney shouted that it looked like Slad had reached his limit. He asked if this was what despair felt like. Then, with a twisted smile, he told Slad not to worry. He could make this gentle. He could send them together to the Transcendent Master. Slad froze at those words. That was the real name of the unique monster, the Fifth Pillar, No Life King. He stood in stunned silence. Now he understood everything. He knew that Zel Harney had been lying. Unique skills are automatically given fitting names corresponding to their effects. Slad stood silently, contemplating the idea. There must be a limit, he thought. If the army were truly infinite, he could summon countless undead and turn them all into undead golems. The thought struck him. Could it really be an infinite army? In other words, he wouldn't need to engage Etekica in a war of attrition. The notion made him uneasy. The skill name, King of the Undead, lingered in his mind. Typically, the term undead referred to incorporeal forms like phantoms and wraiths. However, what he commanded were only zombies and skeletons. If these were the only entities he controlled, shouldn't it be called King of Corpses rather than the King of the Undead? That was his first question. The second question in his mind revolved around the absurdly limitless production capacity. The necromancer's skill, undead creation, consumed magical power, just like the spirit user's spirit summon. Yet, Zel Harney showed no signs of magical depletion, something Slad found highly unusual. He began to wonder if the King of the Undead eliminated the magic consumption from undead creation. The idea sounded a bit extreme. Zel Harney had declared that he would send Slad straight to the underworld. Calmly, Slad placed the unconscious Etekica aside, and then revealed the true name of the unique monster, the Fifth Pillar, No Life King, as the Transcendent Master. Zel Harney expressed surprise that Slad knew this, especially since he wasn't even a necromancer. With an air of arrogance and a wicked laugh, he added that all necromancers placed their faith in that being. Slad interrupted, saying plainly that he believed Zel Harney was lying. He pointed out the endless wave of undead, as if casually summoning them was a stroll in the park. Clearly, this was the work of the No Life King. Simple and plain. In his view, Zel Harney was merely a pawn under the shadow of the 16th Demon Lord, and he could never achieve what the Transcendent Master could. Zel Harney, enraged by those words, dismissed the remark and claimed that if his abilities were slightly exaggerated, then Slad would die here and now. He then ordered the undead golem to crush him. In an instant, the golem launched a fierce attack, and Zel Harney laughed maniacally. calling Slad a mere baggage carrier, and he was getting in the way. He should run away. But Slad stood tall, countered the strike, and dismantled the golem in full view of Zel Harney, who was left stunned, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Slad calmly explained that he could summon as many undead as he wished. In response, Zel Harney raised his staff and summoned more undead. The zombies and skeletons who had been on their way to attack the capital now turned back, redirected towards Slad. With unwavering confidence, Slad revealed that Zel Harney had used his staff instead of the book to summon them. He further explained that the King of the Undead skill had a limit to how much magical energy it could extract from the undead. The skill allowed him to possess and control corpses, and it also had the ability to retrieve undead when defeated and regain magic. He then asked if that was correct. Zel Harney stood speechless, clearly shaken. Slad added that while Zel Harney had appeared calm, when the sylph blasted the undead away, he must have been panicking inside. And now, because the undead had gone beyond his area of control, he could no longer recover the magic. Zel Harney was left utterly shocked by the revelation. Slad continued, explaining that this was precisely why Zel Harney had been unable to replenish his magic to summon more undead. It was then that he called for reinforcements from the capital. This time, they had merged together so he wouldn't get blown away. Had the winds not disoriented him earlier, he would have been able to recover his magic, even after his defeat. And in that case, he could have crushed both Slad and Etekica. But Etekica had summoned a salamander and dragged it into a war of attrition. Calmly, Slad revealed that Zel Harney could only produce about 30,000 undead at most. He then asked if this was true. The number, he added, was the upper limit of magic he can boost with items. With the power of King of the Undead, however, it became possible to retrieve souls from defeated undead, to recover magic, and to summon them again. That, Slad said, was the real truth behind his so-called infinite army. Zel Harney erupted in fury, baffled by Slad's analytical ability. He could no longer dismiss him as a mere baggage carrier. With disbelief in his voice, he demanded to know who Slad really was. Slad glanced towards the unconscious Etekica, thinking to himself that he was just a jobless bum. Then, returning to Zel Harney, he shouted that he was Slad Meisty, the SSS rank adventurer who had defeated the Dragon Empress, Tiamat, 10 years ago. Zel Harney stared at him in disbelief. He couldn't accept it. He pointed a finger at Slad and declared that he would never be able to defeat the mother of the Demon Lord. That caught Slad's attention. He wondered about the Demon Lord's mother. Was the current Demon Lord truly born of the Dragon Empress? He hadn't known that. Zel Harney dismissed the question, insisting it didn't matter. The undead army, now on its way, far exceeded thousands. Slad needed to run. But Slad calmly reminded him what he had just said a moment ago. How he had commanded, "Stomp on that baggage carrier over there." Zel Harney was startled. Then, suddenly, his mighty skull dragon collapsed to the ground. He couldn't comprehend what had happened. Slad asked if perhaps his magic had run out to maintain the creature. He then advised Zel Harney to immediately retreat all the undead from the capital and to recover his magic. Zel Harney, defensive and rattled, insisted that even if he said that, Slad was merely trying to scheme against him. He tried to say something about his infinite army, but Slad cut him off. He bet that Zel Harney had already realized Etekica was after his magic depletion, but Slad had decided to play along with it anyways. From the very first move, Etekica had called for help. Since the sylph could carry messages through the wind, when it screamed, it entrusted a message to its allies. Slad glanced once more at Etekica, whispering to himself that he was the role of the part, and she acted on what Shisha had told her. He then turned to Zel Harney again and said that the results were now close at hand. Zel Harney was visibly shaken. He lowered his head and turned, only to see Dishia and Remeli arriving on the battlefield. Stunned, he muttered that he hadn't known the saint and the witch of the hero party possessed such power. With quiet confidence, Slad stated that up until now, he had only been supporting the hero Aries. Suddenly, Shisha appeared in a flash. She swiftly snatched the staff from Zel Harney's hand, knocking him to the ground. Zel Harney was stunned. There was a thief in the team? Shisha looked at him while holding his staff and remarked that both the staff and the book were forbidden items. She figured she'd sell them to the guild as research materials. Then, with a sly grin, she commanded the undead to attack him. Indeed, the undead army began advancing towards Zel Harney. Panic and rage surged within him. Why was the staff responding to her? It should only be usable by a necromancer. Shisha casually replied that as he could see, she was a thief. She had her limitations, of course, but with item utilization, she could use most items, regardless of their original conditions, which meant he could no longer control an infinite army. She smiled as she delivered the truth. Zel Harney stood frozen, stunned by her words, while the undead army marched towards him. The army of the undead launched an attack on Zel Harney, causing significant damage. Slad sat on the ground, remarking that somehow the situation hadn't turned into a complete disaster. Shisha responded, noting that it had been quite a pretty tough date with Etekica. Slad mentioned that herb gathering was quite a fine quest, then casually asked if she had been lurking for a long time. He also commented that Zel Harney could have shown up a bit sooner. Shisha wondered aloud what she could have possibly done in that situation. Slad paused to think, then brought up the idea of stealing Death Road, King of the Undead. Shisha told him to stop joking, pointing out that the unique skills like Talent Thief couldn't steal such abilities. She added that, in any case, it had been out of range from the start. At that moment, Dishia and Remeli arrived, running. Dishia asked about Etekica's situation, then approached and concluded it had simply been a case of mana shortage. Slad thanked her for arriving quickly, to which Dishia replied that he spoke as if it had been a piece of cake for him. Slad explained that standing around would debuff all the undead, so he had, in fact, put in some effort. Meanwhile, Remeli looked towards Zel Harney, who lay injured on the ground nearby, and remarked that he appeared to be a demon. She approached him and stood before him. With great difficulty and a faint voice, Zel Harney said he was a half-demon and asked what she wanted from him. Remeli inquired if he knew a demon by the name of Carned. Zel Harney looked at her and said he'd never heard of that name. Remeli stated that she had no further use for him. Gasping for breath, Zel Harney told her she looked down on him as a half-demon and must therefore be someone who hated demons. He suggested she might as well finish him off. Remeli, however, said she would refrain from doing so. She then looked over at Slad, Dishia, and Shisha, who gathered around Etekica and engaged in quiet conversation. Quietly, Remeli said she understood the situation well, and eliminating him now would be pointless. He began to say something about the Demon Lord, then summoned his remaining strength, and with blood spewing from his mouth, shouted that he had the power to bring the dead back to life. Dishia was stunned by his words and broke into a sweat. Remeli questioned whether the Demon Lord could truly use Revive the Dead. Shisha dismissed the claim as nothing but lies and a pitiful excuse. With difficulty, Zel Harney raised his hand and said that if they believed such things, they were free to think whatever they wanted. He explained that the Demon Lord had inherited powers from his mother specifically, the power to control life. He wasn't just a low-ranking demon. He was the leader of the Undead Brigade, and he would be certainly resurrected. He then pointed at them all. With concern and suspicion, Dishia worried if the Demon Lord could really revive the dead. Remeli thought of her mother. Dishia continued, saying the return of the dead would be almost too easy. Shisha protested, saying that it couldn't possibly be true, and life wasn't a replaceable item. Those who treated life so carelessly should never be allowed to control it. A heavy silence settled among the women. Suddenly, Slad spoke with sharp confidence, saying that the Demon Lord could indeed resurrect the dead. But even if that were true, he doubted Zel Harney would return. The girls looked at him, all holding on to a sliver of hope. In the castle of the Dragon Demon Lord, located in Wushmungal, the dwarf servant informed his master that Zel Harney had been felled. The Demon Lord was displeased by Zel Harney's failure and grew angry, stating that he had made him the leader of the Undead Brigade because of his unique skill. The servant wondered aloud what they would do next. The dragon demon lord replied that Zel Harney must be brought back to life. His skill was far too valuable to be wasted. He stretched out his hand and gave the command to revive Zel Harney. Yet nothing happened. Surprised, the dragon demon lord turned to the servant and asked what this meant. The servant, confused, wondered what had gone wrong. The dragon demon lord noted that Zel Harney was neither healing nor returning to life. The servant didn't understand, and the dragon demon lord questioned why Zel Harney was not responding to his call. Embarrassed and afraid, the servant confessed he didn't understand, and hesitantly suggested that perhaps Zel Harney was refusing the call. The dragon demon lord shouted at him in rage, declaring that the revival command was absolute, as all his orders were, and that his servant's will meant nothing. The servant, feeling helpless, said he had no idea why Zel Harney wasn't responding. The demon lord once again erupted, his voice thundering throughout the castle as he demanded to know what was happening to the revival. The powerful cry shook the entire fortress. Undead creatures and skeletons collapsed, while skull dragons stirred in fury, plunging the place into chaos. In this chaos, the dragon lord killed and resurrected his servant 101 times. Afterward, he sat quietly and brought him back to life once more. In this moment, the servant sat in disarray. The demon lord asked him to offer his thanks. The servant bowed in gratitude. The demon lord affirmed that his power had not faded, then asked why Zel Harney was not reviving. The servant hesitated, then asked if he might pose a question. The demon lord, in a rare moment of leniency, said he would grant him mercy, and told him to clear away his doubt. Sweating, the servant asked whether, regardless of who they were, maybe there were powers that couldn't always bring someone back to life. The demon lord straightened, saying that if the answer to that question revealed the reason, then it must be known. The servant replied that it was likely true, perhaps even certainly so. The demon lord began to explain. He said that among the powers inherited from his mother, there were 3 things that could not be brought back by revival. Of these, there was only one type the servant had yet not encountered. The dragon demon lord paused and revealed that those who had reached the end of their lifespan could not be resurrected. The servant was astonished. If that were the case, then Zel Harney must have been struck down by a skill that steals lifespan. The demon lord asked if such a skill truly existed. Still kneeling, the servant said that if it were a unique skill, then its existence was indeed possible. The servant concluded that this must be the reason Zel Harney did not respond to the revival call. The dragon demon lord agreed. His explanation was far more reasonable than the idea of Zel Harney resisting the revival call. Then, the servant said that this was the reason if the demon lord's heart could be clear. The dragon demon lord turned his gaze towards the servant and asked if he had just doubted his powers. He said such an offense deserved 1,000 deaths. He began counting aloud, continuing until he reached 10,000. Then, he declared the punishment for his servant complete and raised his hand to issue the reviving command on him. The demon lord remarked that he had hoped to meet the hero at least once before bringing him in, but now there was nothing he could do. It was troublesome, but perhaps he would need to find another method. That man had much worth. He then asked the servant if he thought so. Nervously sweating, the servant stammered that he would, and said that if it were fine, then the hero should be brought back. The demon lord looked at his crazed state and fell silent. The dragon demon lord summoned Black Crow, the chief strategist, who appeared immediately. The demon lord then ordered him to bring the hero Aries back to life. He asked if the task would be easy, to which Black Crow replied that if it was the order of the Demon King, then he would definitely make it happen. Meanwhile, Slad and his companions went to King Cashew's mansion and informed him of what had happened. The king questioned the concept of reviving the dead, remarking that if that were true, then this would be a real headache. He acknowledged that those whose lifespans had run out should not return. Slad responded that if such a power were inherited from the Dragon Empress, then it was indeed possible. He added that the monsters that had aged due to his debuffs 10 years ago had not revived either. The king reflected on how this had been the most difficult battle against the Dragon Empress. It was the monsters, who kept reviving endlessly. But it seemed Slad's debuffs had been effective, leading to a complete turnaround. He then noted that if the victories continued without diminishing the enemy's numbers, a major strategy shift might be necessary. Slad assured him that he didn't believe it was as ridiculous as the Dragon Empress's ability. At most, he thought it would only affect 1 or 2 individuals at a time. Shisha asked his opinion on whether she was going to pull Aries out, mentioning that perhaps they should wait for him to be executed. Dishia commented that this was a contradiction of things, while Remeli suggested that there must be some kind of limitation on the revival. King Cashew urged them to set that matter aside for now, pointing out the immediate issue was how to handle Aries. If they executed him, he might come back. For that reason, they could no longer sentence Aries to death so carelessly. Dishia remarked that it shouldn't be a problem, since Aries is no longer possessing the power of a hero. However, Slad cautioned that if Aries joined the demon army, he might become wild and unrestrained like a fish back in water. Remeli noted that without Slad, Aries had always been weak, and even if he joined the demon army, they might abandon him anyway. Slad then suggested they could make Aries appear older using debuffs, but King Cashew interrupted him, waving his hand and refusing to let Slad be played as the executioner. Closing his eyes, the king said the matter would have to be postponed for now. Then, opening them with clarity and vigor, he thanked them once more, expressing his heartfelt gratitude for truly saving him. He mentioned that rewards would be settled another day, and praised them for their efforts. Shisha announced that she would take her leave first. Dishia said she was heading back to the temple, while Remeli remarked that it was all part of the job. Slad paused for a moment, as if about to say something, but held back. Dishia asked him what was wrong. Etekica, meanwhile, was deep in thought. She didn't believe this was their final farewell, but somehow she felt a strange twinge of loneliness. Even though she had been fine with Aries kicked her aside, perhaps her old self had simply given up. If Slad had known her power, he might have stopped seeing her for who she truly was. For now, things were different. He stayed by her side, knowing exactly who she was, and the friends who were with her too. She wanted to continue with all of them. Exciting times awaited, and she wanted to go on an adventure. At that moment, King Cashew made a suggestion. It was about to form a party once again. In the early morning, Slad was the first to wake up. He sat at the breakfast table, still sleepy, barely able to open his eyes as he drank his coffee. While he was like that, Etekica woke up after him and joined him at the breakfast table. She opened the bags that had been placed on the table and laid out the food, desserts, and everything delicious and appetizing, making the spread look tempting and mouthwatering. Slad began eating his breakfast, and while going through the request, he had stopped at some news titled Fate of the False Hero. It stated that the hero Aries had been sentenced 2 months ago. Surprised, he spilled his coffee and lowered his head. Etekica asked him what had happened, and asked him to tell her. Slad shouted that even though they had reformed the party just 2 months ago, they hadn't had a decent adventure yet. He had been so careful, but before knowing it, he was wallowing in despair. At first, he was disciplined. After all his funds ran out, he began recklessly using his rank perks. He had not only obtained an inn, but a vacation home. He was not just consuming food, but desserts. He remembered that the king had high hopes for him. He had been taking the easy path and had been dragging Etekica along with him. And Etekica, to him, was so deeply involved in this mess that she didn't even question it. Etekica was surprised by his words and said that she may not look like a typical adventurer, but she liked it that way. Then she asked him to look at the cute outfit she was wearing, and he replied that it was really cute. Slad thought that this was a lavish lifestyle that shouldn't be taught to new adventurers. He angrily hit the table and said, how could an adventurer flaunt their SSS rank perks when all they had done was gather herbs and hunt goblins? Dishia commented that that was true, and that maybe the request had become a bit stale lately. Slad excitedly told her that she could express her opinions more. Etekica said that she thought she could leave anything to Slad. Slad felt disappointed because Etekica had become similar to that of a helpless child who couldn't rely on herself. He then patted her shoulder and said that, in any case, they should take on a different job, at least for today. Etekica placed the request on the table and asked everyone to look at it. Shisha said that it was likely just a goblin hunt today, so she would pass. Remeli, while drinking juice, said she could help with gathering herbs, but goblins were extremely annoying. Etekica picked up the request and said that this time, things seemed different than usual. Shisha read it and said the reward value was 30 goblins, and honestly it felt a bit underwhelming. Etekica then asked her to read what was written down and pointed her finger to the paragraph that said, "Adventure rank upgrade from E to D." She said that this request was mainly about the rank up reward. Etekica lit up with joy and excitement, saying that if they succeeded, she would finally be able to rise from level E to D. Remeli said that this would be no problem, and that if Etekica remained at level E, then they wouldn't be able to take on higher level requests. Shisha said that it sounded good. Slad smiled happily, realizing that Etekica was indeed thinking seriously about the rank up. He said that if that were the case, then he could ask Remeli to make more healing potions than usual. Remeli replied enthusiastically that she would definitely get started on that. The girls were genuinely excited about the request, while Slad was thinking about how much everyone hated goblin hunting. He said that he would contact Dishia, and in the meantime, they should prepare everything. In the temple courtyard, there was a sword duel between two young men amid a crowd of spectators. The winner of the duel was from the village, Runoa, named Eska. Slad noticed them while he was passing through the corridor and was truly impressed by what they were doing. He continued on his way, thinking about the selection of the hero. Since Aries stopped being the hero, people from all over the world had gathered to declare themselves as the next hero. Although it seemed that Dishia did not support this method of selection for the next hero. On his way, he met Dishia carrying clothes. She greeted him with a morning greeting. Slad asked her if she was going to wash the clothes now and offered his help. Dishia thanked him, and the two of them headed to the laundry room. While they were washing the clothes, Slad said that seeing a saint doing laundry was something wonderful for an apprentice. Dishia replied that she did it because she wanted to, then smiled. Slad looked at her and asked if she was supposed to be watching the hero selection today. She answered him while wringing the clothes, saying that she already did, and with that method, she realized it was impossible to find someone worthy of being a hero. Slad told her that this exam was made for those who believed in the hero legends from the old continent. Dishia, while hanging the clothes, said that it was merely a formal procedure, and that it was already a failure if someone sought to become a hero through ambition. She added that those who wished to improve the world were already doing what they could within their means. And if someone believed they could only do so by becoming a hero, then that person was disqualified. Slad felt like that was a bit harsh, but this was after Aries. On their way to her room, Dishia asked him why he had come here today. He handed her the request. She read it and said that Etekica was doing her best, and if that were the case, then she would help. Slad thanked her and asked if everything was going well at the temple. She said that, as he could see, the priests were handling all of the administrative stuff, and that no people with serious injuries had been coming to the area, since only a saint could handle them. She smiled, put her finger to her lips as if telling a secret, and said that being a saint was surprisingly boring. She added that she was sure that she would meet someone more worthy of being a hero by staying with all of them. That was how it was for her. She said all that while Slad sat in front of the window, watching another duel and looking at the defeated person. Dishia and Slad went to the guild. As they entered, Etekica asked why this particular receptionist was here. Slad was surprised by what she was saying, though the receptionist said that it was through sheer effort and determination. She was a suitable personnel. Then suddenly, she climbed onto the counter, watching her with a dire expression. The receptionist rushed towards Slad. Etekica felt a rush of fright and asked Slad to run away, as this woman was dangerous. But the receptionist threw herself into Slad's arms, looked at him, and said that she hadn't seen him in a long time, and asked how he was. Slad was surprised and asked her if they had met somewhere before. The receptionist felt embarrassed, and asked him to remember her. She had previously proposed to him passionately. Slad recalled something about that proposal and, surprised, said that she was the one who had submitted the marriage application. She greeted him and said that her name was Serena. then smiled and asked him to remember her name this time. Slad was shocked and stepped back, wondering why Serena was in the Capital's guild. She answered that she had heard Slad was staying in the capital and didn't want to miss her chance. Then she smiled and said she wanted to apologize for her rudeness. She had actually been working really hard and improving her sales performance. She had fought for this transfer to this branch. Slad told her that her love, or rather, pressure, was overwhelming. Meanwhile, the girls were watching their conversation. Shisha said that it looked like an interesting relationship. Remeli wondered if Serena would end up marrying that person, but Dishia said it would be cheating on Etekica, and she was ready to punch him once more. Slad looked at her in astonishment and proclaimed that he wasn't even dating Etekica. With a horrified expression, Slad screams out, as presumably the women start to hit him.